Introverts, what's the craziest thing you've done to avoid human interaction? I was 5 minutes late to school, so I decided to skip school altogether that day to avoid the awkward class entry. College. I had to attend an out-of-town conference with my classmates as part of the requirements for a course. My professor had booked a block of rooms at the hotel where the conference was held, and people were going to put 3 to 4 guys or girls to a room and split the cost. My classmates had a bunch of socializing and bar hopping planned, which sounds like my idea of a living hell. Also, all of them carpooled together in groups. I honestly would rather have walked barefoot across a mile of Legos than be held hostage in a car for 4 hours with people I barely know. A few people asked if I wanted to carpool with them and what room I was in, and I said, "Oh, thank you so much. I'm actually staying with a friend in town though, and I'm stoked to see her. I'm going to have to take my own car so I can drive to the conference. I'll catch you guys there." Just so I wouldn't come off as a weirdo. But I actually reserved a room at another hotel way across town, attended the bare minimum of the conference, and enjoyed as many coffee shops, art museums, downtown shopping trips, and nature trails as I could. When I was in the military, I volunteered for a deployment to get out of going to a wedding. Back when I had roommates I didn't know very well, I'd spend all day in my room without meals to avoid awkward pleasantries. Then I'd get really hungry, but the prospect of explaining why I'd spent all day in my room kept me inside. Then they'd text me and ask me if I was okay, and I'd say, "Yep, just keeping busy with some projects." And they'd ask if I'd eaten anything since they hadn't seen me, and I'd say, "Yep, trust me, I'd never go without food." And then I'd wake up at midnight and steal my own food from the fridge. I've done the same thing, except I already knew my roommate pretty well. He just had some company over that I didn't want to talk to. So I stayed in my room for 2 days, except for like 3 or 4 in the morning, when I'd sneak out to get food from 24-hour fast food joints. The narrator is incapable of waiting for longer than like 2 hours without going feral and making a sprint for the fridge and cupboard, so your restraint is equally as impressive as your massive, massive introverted bent. In high school, I didn't have a car, so I just walked home. I used to just walk fast to try and beat the crowd of people, but I just didn't want to deal with it anymore, so I would stay in the computer lab sometimes and ask my dad to pick me up a few hours later. So once the bell rang to go home, I'd just stay in class since I had computers last. The teacher would forget I was there and not even notice me and turn the lights off, lock the door, and then leave. Honestly, I didn't mind at all. I got to play video games by myself, and one time, about an hour and a half later, the janitor came in and I guess I scared him. He turned on the lights and literally screamed when he saw me. Rather than associate with my nosy aunt when I lived with her, I told her I was going out for a while, moved my car up the street, and sat in it watching Netflix on my phone for a couple of hours. I killed my already dead grandma a couple of times to get out of social events. "Hey man, you gonna make it to the party?" "I can't. I have plans to go murder my grandma instead." I went to an empty room and stood in the dark for 45 minutes to avoid a team bonding event. In 7th grade, I'd hide in the science lab during lunch and recess time and feed and play with the school pets. I'd ask to use the bathroom around 10 minutes into lunch and then come back in the last 2 minutes, and they probably thought I had some real bad bowel issues. There were 2 birds, a bunny and 2 guinea pigs. I'd feed them carrots and talk to them. Nobody knew that I was there for half the year when one of my teachers finally walked in on me. I thought I was busted. Luckily, she was one of the nicer ones and made it my official job to play with and feed the animals. I had something similar happen in 7th grade. I don't remember how it started, but at one point a couple of 8th grade girls bullied me and I volunteered to help a teacher during her lunch period. Same as mine. I'd grade spelling tests. So she hired me as her assistant and I graded papers. I was a very good student and spelling was my jam, so it's not like I hated it. Fun fact, we're now friends on Facebook 35 years later. What a great teacher. But the fact is, I'm sure she loved me for saving her from taking home a bunch of stuff to grade. I go through the drive-thru just to park and eat alone in my car. I went on a 3-week camping trip to avoid 2 family reunions. I'm going to be driving across country starting tomorrow to avoid my family's Thanksgiving dinner, so I feel you. I stopped talking for an entire year of school, 5th grade to be precise. Getting off the bus at the wrong stop and walking because I pressed the stop button too soon and didn't want to tell the driver. When I was 12, a man in a suit who I didn't know knocked on the door. I could see him through the front room window, so I hid behind the chair. I looked up to see if he had gone and made eye contact. I stayed where I was. Wasn't the last time that happened either. I'm 29. A guy knocked on my door and I looked into the peephole and he was looking directly gazing back into it at me, so I ducked and crouched at the base of the door, and then he opened the mail slot to look in, which was right above me, and I just laid on the ground until he went away. I wear headphones all the time, even if they're off or not plugged in. I'm so much more productive at work, people at the gym let me be, and people on the street leave me alone on my walk home. My roommate threw a party at my house and I hid from everyone. There's only one front door and everyone would see me if I left and would want to talk to me. I avoided eating that whole night because I didn't want to walk by the party to get my food. My car was trapped between other cars. I ended up jumping out of a second-story window and walking 3 miles to a 7-Eleven. I'm not as shy and introverted as I used to be, but now I have moods where I don't even want to see a single person until the mood has passed. When I was living in dorms in college, I'd stand in my closet or bathroom for hours just so I wouldn't have to see the people talking in my room. I ended up hearing a lot of conversations I shouldn't have heard because nobody ever knew I was there. Going to cross the street but then stopping and pretending I don't have to if there's a car approaching so I don't inconvenience them. I once spent a weekend in a hotel because I wanted to be alone and chill reading books and watching TV. The people I lived with at the time couldn't spend more than an hour on their own without some sort of social interaction. The roomie I have now is like-minded and we can go days without talking or seeing each other, and it's great! I was getting a taxi back home and I must have mumbled or garbled my destination because it was quite clear he was going to a completely different place. Like literally as soon as he turned right out of the parking lot instead of left. I literally let the guy drive for 15 minutes in the wrong direction, eventually just blurting out, "Anywhere here will do," and giving him a tenner, and then just walking aimlessly until I found public transport that I recognized and jumped on that. A 10-minute cab drive turned into a nearly 2-hour journey home. For those who are curious and who live in Manchester, I wanted to get a cab from Ashton to Openshaw, and I ended up going to Oldham, getting a tram to the city centre, and getting a train from there back home. There was only a front door in the place I was living, and there was a very large crowd of neighbours outside, having some sort of social gathering or barbecue. I really needed to pick up some food for dinner, but I really didn't want to interact with them. So I jumped out of the living room window, walked the long way around the neighbourhood to get to the store. Thankfully, they kept the party out front so that when I came back, I could sneak back in through the window. Okay, so the narrator thought that he was an introvert, but a lot of you are showing me just how comparatively okay and well-adjusted I'm doing in day-to-day life. I actually go out of my way to cross the road slower and make eye contact if it looks like a car is revving or accelerating to intimidate me to cross quicker. I think it's up to us to make them obey the road rules. I have phone anxiety. I was going to drive 1.5 hours to my college to talk to them in person over the summer instead of just calling to follow up on something. I lived in a loft downtown on the 3rd floor. The amount of times I used the stairs in an effort to not be trapped in an elevator with a stranger is too many to count. One time there was a family moving in. I walked all the way around the building to the opposite side's entrance to get into the building. Then they were using the elevators, so I took the stairs. Then they were on my floor moving crap in. I didn't want it to look like I was trying this hard to avoid them, so I said, "Whoops, wrong floor," and walked up 2 extra floors and waited 10 minutes before going back down to see if they were gone. What should have taken me 5 minutes took me closer to 30 to get into my apartment. That's when I realized I might have a problem. I never answer the door unless I'm expecting someone. Just today, actually, my neighbor was knocking on my door this morning and I didn't answer. When it was time to head to work, I realized I didn't have my keys. I think my neighbor found them and was trying to return them. Okay, sure enough, I left my keys in the door last night, and my neighbor was nice enough to try to return them. But since I never answer my door, he took them to the front office. Let this be a lesson to my fellow introverts. Don't leave your keys in the door. I routinely cross streets or turn down streets that are in the wrong direction of where I'm going to avoid awkward interactions with vehicles as a pedestrian. Please don't stop and give me that "it's okay to go" wave when there's still traffic barreling down the opposite side of the street and you're the only vehicle trying to be courteous. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but it would be easier for everyone if you just kept driving. I failed an important test once because I was too scared to ask the teacher for a pencil. If I notice someone waiting for the elevator when I'm leaving work, I'll turn around and go back to my office acting like I forgot something just so I don't have to endure 15 floors of not talking to someone I barely know. It's a daily thing. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I ordered flour from Amazon to make my own bread, since Amazon didn't deliver bread. I took a Maymester course one year and had to move out of my old dorm into a new one for 1 month. I had a new suite mate, we shared a bathroom, and I didn't speak with him the entire time. I'd only use the bathroom if I was certain he was gone. In my defense, he seemed to do the exact same. I often find that if I don't make the effort, most other people don't either. I googled what time the Apple Store closed instead of asking someone whilst in the Apple Store. There was a couple of months, besides going to mandatory things like work or school, where I didn't leave my room or interact with anyone. All I did between work and sleep was eat and read. In order to avoid a mandatory Christmas social for work, the Christmas party was mandatory because I was working at a preschool, and the company wanted to up their reputation as a family-oriented organization to the rich parents who were throwing insane amounts of money at the company to babysit their kids. So they had a preschool Christmas concert followed by an after-party for the parents to get to know the faculty, as if we didn't see them every fricking day at drop-off and pick-up. The party was also meant to be a way for us co-workers to get to know each other, as if we hadn't worked together Monday to Friday, 7 till 6 p.m. every fricking week. Screw that. I legitimately took myself to the ER just to get the registration wristband for proof that I actually went to the hospital, and then I left. I wasn't sick or anything, and I didn't even see a doctor. I just needed a hospital wristband to prove that I had a reason not to go to the work mixer, so that I wouldn't get fired. I hated my co-workers. I hid under a bed while a real estate agent showed a couple around my flat. I couldn't be bothered to go out, but I can't stand small talk, so I decided to lay low. I had a cup of tea, cushions, a Nokia phone with Snake on it. I was quite happy under there. They were 25 minutes late. I guess I was under the bed for just over an hour. I feared a sneeze. I was in my early 20s, by the way. I work at a hotel, and one of the worst things about it are the really chatty guests. They'll just stand at my desk and jibber-jabber, completely failing to take the hint. Even saying, "Excuse me, I have a lot of work to do," will typically only get them to say, "Oh, don't let me interrupt," but then they'll never walk away. I've learned to call the hotel phone from my cell phone. I answer the phony call and tell the guest, "Excuse me, this is important." Then I slip into the back and watch them on the video monitors until they F off. I saw a coworker from my new job at the bus station. I couldn't bear the idea of awkward chit-chat, so I hid around the corner, figuring I'd get the next bus as I knew I had enough time. The next bus didn't turn up, and I was late for work. I went on an entire week-long vacation out of the country by myself. I went sightseeing, went on tours, ate out at a restaurant, all by myself, and didn't talk to anyone I didn't have to. It was amazing. I was invited to the birthday party of an old high school friend who was part of the popular crowd in those days. I knew it would be a big party full of super outgoing people that I didn't really want to interact with all at once. My solution? Join a music ensemble. Learn 4 different instruments with rehearsals twice a week for 4 months because the concert date was the same as the party, and that would give me a valid and honest excuse to skip. So instead of talking to people, I played close to 50 collective hours of serialist and phase music. Not a bad trade in my books. The postman was knocking on my door, so rather than answer it, I decided to army crawl past the door so that he wouldn't see me through the frosted glass. Then he pushed open the letterbox and saw me splayed across the floor. Okay, what is with all the people who decide to behave like velociraptors and terminators when they're checking if people are home? I mean, in this case, they were successful and revealed the people hiding from them, but it's kind of a breach of privacy and rude. Maybe more acceptable for this mailman who probably just wants to dump a package, but that guy in the suit earlier was way out of line. So, this thread is making me realize I'm not as shy and introverted as I thought I was. Bravo! Apparently on the internet, introvert is synonymous with crippling social anxiety that ruins your life. Telling the pizza guy through a cracked door that I didn't order pizza just to avoid talking face to face was kind of my low point. I used my then 3-year-old child as a human shield on the couch when my husband brought company over before a trip. I just hid behind her. 3.5 years later, one of those friends is now considered family to us, and I love that bro dearly. I took my breakfast into a wheelchair stall at a remote toilet in the corner of the floor that I worked so that I wouldn't have to talk to my coworkers. I was at a dorm party in college. I became overwhelmed and hid under my girlfriend's bed. They looked for me and everything. Once I was able to rejoin the party, I strolled back in and acted like I'd stepped out. I cringe thinking about that. This is hilarious. Thank God they didn't find you. Dude, one time my girlfriend and I threw a party at our own darn house. I felt the anxiety coming on at some point and went to my room, laid down in my dog's bed with my dog and just laid there. When they came looking, I pretended to be passed out drunk. I was sober and awake. Every single day I order Starbucks on the app no matter how inside the store I am. A lot of days there isn't even a line, but that doesn't stop me. I'm not proud of this, but I spent the last 10 years building an investment portfolio that I could live on and retire early. The reason I wanted so badly to retire was so that I didn't have to spend time with banalities like small talk and pointless meetings with my coworkers. So, in a nutshell, I went frugal, saved and invested my money, and stopped working, all just to avoid talking to Bob from accounting. When I'm stuck at an event or party I don't want to be at but can't immediately leave, I tend to spend a lot of time in the bathroom browsing Reddit. I'm normally introverted and hate crowds and strangers. If someone unexpected rings my doorbell, I'll Spider-Man crawl under windows and throughout my damn house to try to see who it is without alerting them to the fact that I'm home. However, when I was in high school, I'd still go to house parties or the club with my friends, even though I hated clubbing with every fiber of my being. Peer pressure is really the worst. The problem would arise when I became drunk. Suddenly, I'd be convinced that I needed to be far away from any and all human interaction, so I'd find a place to hide. I never went too far because even in my drunken state, I didn't want my friends to worry, but there are numerous stories about me disappearing while on the source, and for the most part, no one could ever find me unless I let them. I've hidden in playgrounds, in bushes, a forest, my friend's sister's bedroom closet, a tool shed, the backseat of my own car, around the side of a house beside a wheelbarrow, under a bed, in a laundry room, numerous bathrooms, and there were also a few times where I was really drunk that I tried to hide in a corner and convinced myself that no one could see me. The most embarrassing was probably the drunkest I've ever been. I don't even fully remember it since I blacked out. My friend used to have house parties in his parents' basement, and again, I decided I needed to get away, so I went to his upstairs kitchen and hid under their kitchen table. What I was too drunk to realize was that his 3 older brothers were in the attached living room watching a movie at the time. I left eventually for a corner in the basement, but that night dubbed me as the dead girl in the corner because my friend's brother kept apparently asking him, "Okay, but what should we do with the dead girl in the corner?" Clubs were different because I didn't want to leave and risk not being able to get back in, so my friends always knew that if I was missing, I was probably in a bathroom stall and they'd have to try to coax me out. As I've gotten older, I've pretty much stopped drinking altogether, and after a few not quite drunk enough club outings, I've told my friends that clubbing just wasn't for me anymore. I knew once I started bringing a book to a club so that I could read it in a bathroom stall that it just wasn't worth my time, money, or discomfort anymore. In short, I hide when drunk, or spend time at the club reading in a bathroom stall to avoid socializing with people. I choose to have my parcels delivered to a collection point that I have to drive to rather than risking having to speak to my neighbors. My girlfriend's roommate came back one night with a bunch of their friends that I'd never met before. I'm not particularly skilled socially, nor do I care to be, but I can get through introducing myself and making a good first impression to 1 or 2 people at once, but 10 people is too many. So my girlfriend goes to talk to all of them and wants me to meet them. So I say I'll be out soon, I have a bit of a headache. So I think for a while of how I'm going to get through this, but then I realize that it's been so long that if I go out now, it'll be super awkward. Then I hear someone coming in, so I hide in the closet. Now, I really can't get out of there, so I stay in the closet for a while. Then I come out and get into bed and pretend to be sleeping. When my girlfriend comes back in, she wakes me up and asks me where I was, so I pull a George Costanza and lie and say that I snuck out and went to the store to get some aspirin and then snuck back in and fell asleep. She wants to know why I didn't go through the front door and say hi to everyone on my way out, so I said that I didn't want to disturb their fun, so I went out the side door. I'm willing to pay an extra $300 in rent if it means I get the whole place to myself. I called in sick on the day of a big company all-hands meet and greet. I dropped a college course when I heard two people whisper my name behind me.
Those who have walked out on first dates, what was your I'm outta here moment? Legitimately, when she said she needed to take a wee as we walked down a back alley next to the bar. She pulled her jeans down, took a poop behind a bin, then searched in the bin and wiped with a sheet of newspaper. I was totally infatuated with her after working with her for a few months, and in 30 seconds, it completely disappeared. Fast. Went to meet a guy for the first time at his house. There was a pile of toenail clippings on his coffee table, and it wasn't one recent clipping. It was like many clippings. I quickly left. She had 22 cats and would just randomly take in strays, not give them any vet care, and was planning on keeping a recent litter. I love cats. I paid the bartender when she went to the bathroom and hyper walked to the door. I forwarded her contact info and a summary of what she told me to the Humane Society. This guy and I were eating dinner after chatting for a couple of weeks, and unprompted, in the middle of something I was saying, and completely unrelated to what was being discussed, he said something along the lines of, "So, you know in order for this to work, you're gonna have to share yourself, right? My friends and I like to pass girls around." I was pretty dumbfounded, and after a bit of stuttering, I told him I didn't think it was gonna work. I asked for a to-go box and my portion of the check, and noped out of there. I had a first date with a girl who insisted we go to a really expensive place, where she ordered a $25 appetizer, $45 steak, and a $15 drink. She also wouldn't put her phone down, kept taking calls and answering texts. The waitress noticed and motioned for me from behind her. I excused myself, and the waitress had made separate bills and asked if I wanted to pay my share and leave hers at the table. I said that would be wonderful, so I did. He invited me and a friend to play dodgeball with a group of folks I've never met. We're having an okay time, but he's paying more attention to his friends. But that's fine because I've got my friend to keep me occupied. We're hanging out in the parking lot before the first game is about to start when out of nowhere he grabs a ball and throws it at my crotch as hard as he can. This dude screams, "Wham bam, right in the clam." I immediately turn to my friend and ask her if she's ready to leave. I say goodbye to him and his friends, immediately come home to a gripe of texts about how immature I was behaving. I was on a first date with a military guy. He spent a large portion of the date talking about why the strippers in Toronto were better than the strippers where we lived. To change the topic, I asked him if he did any volunteer work with military overseas. And he said, "No, I joined the military to kill people, not help people." I got my bill, chugged my beer, and left as fast as I could. The fact that within 10 minutes of meeting him, he started making sexual comments and joking about following me home so he could stalk me if I rejected him. I got out with the help of a bartender who let me leave out the back door. Not me, but this happened to a friend. For context, this friend has a beard. So my friend picks up this girl and they're on their way to dinner. And she says, "You do realize that if this is gonna work, you have to shave that off, right?" He didn't say anything, just turned around and dropped her back off at her house. This is meeting someone from an online dating app. He turns up with pupils the size of dinner plates and super erratic. He said he'd forgotten his wallet, so I got the first round. We were on our way to the second pub to meet his friends so they could lend him some money. For the walk there, he spoke absolute garbage and nonsense nonstop, but ended with how he tried to drown his ex's chihuahuas in a pool. Near the pub, he said he had to answer whoever was calling him on the phone. At this point, we were 30 minutes into the date and already going to the next pub. He downed his drink in about 3 seconds. Whilst he stood there on the phone, I said I'd meet him at the pub. Everything was in close proximity. But instead, I walked past it and ran all the way home. 1 p.m. lunch date and she was drunk as a skunk. She invited me back to her place where she said her 2-year-old son wouldn't even notice. I noped out and called her a cab home. I still feel bad for the son years later. She finally let it slip that she had a boyfriend, but it was totally fine because things have been going bad for a long time and I'm gonna break up with him anyway. My thoughts were that if she would do that to him, she'd do it to me. No thanks. We had great chats online and decided to meet in person. He's got a Bluetooth headset on with a little LED light that shows it's on. He keeps it on during drinks. I work up the nerve to ask if he can take off the headset while we're eating dinner. With pride and complete confidence, he says, "Don't worry, you'll have my full attention. This isn't a phone headset, it's a camera." Invited me to a bar which was apparently close to his apartment and kept wanting to snuggle at his apartment with me. I left to a friend's party and met the man I'd been with for 3+ years. The first guy later texted me explicit photos on Easter Sunday. She brought her pet rat with her that was hanging out in her bra and kept feeding it french fries. She casually mentioned she had warrants, so I just faked an emergency and bailed. He started making inappropriate comments, then took me to his house to use the bathroom before the next part of our date. We had lunch first, then we were supposed to play mini golf. I didn't know he lived with his parents, so I had to meet them on the first date. They were nice, but I felt so uncomfortable because I already knew this wasn't going to move beyond date number 1 thanks to his remarks. He told me to wait in his room while he went to the bathroom, and I noticed that his computer was on. Before our date, he was chatting with a friend and left it up on the screen. The last message he'd sent said, "I hope I get to see her boobs. I bet they're so perky and small." What? Why leave that up and send me in there to see it? I lied, saying that my mom called with an emergency and needed me back home. Noped out of there and never spoke to him again. I had to pick him up and he complained about everything. My car, the way I drove, my music taste, why was I being so quiet whilst carefully plotting my escape plan? But it was definitely the moment he said, "My friends really want to meet you. I need them to know you're real." And that's when I bounced. He was 45 minutes late picking me up. Weather was quite poor, so I gave him a pass. We get to the coffee shop, I take off my jacket, and immediately he says, "Oh, I see you brought your A game. Or should I say D game?" Referring to my breasts. I'm surprisingly busty for my frame. Even the people 2 tables over just stopped and looked at him. I had invited a guy off a dating site to my house. When I opened the door, he said he could kill me if he wanted and to never meet anyone off the internet again. My 2 male roommates were in the kitchen because they knew this guy was coming and heard him. They ran him out of the house pretty damn quick. We started by chatting online. At the time, I was a smoker and told him. He said no big deal because he smokes too. We decided to meet up at Starbucks for coffee. First thing he said, "Hi, by the way, when I said I smoke, I was talking about meth." I said, "Oh, bye," and turned around and left. The guy wanted to meet at a place where I used to work at. I showed up and he was already there. I ordered vodka and we're glaring into the menu while his shots arrive and he's just pounding them back. The base bartender is giving the stink eye. I know him, so I'm like, WTF. The date steps out for the bathroom or to vape or something, and the bartender beelines to my table to warn me that this guy is a raging alcoholic that messed around with his cousin a few months back. I noped right out of there. I had a first date with a girl who told me, "Actually, I'm engaged, but I'm not 100% sure if he's the right one. So I'm just gonna go on a few dates to see if I change my mind." Check please. He invited me inside while he finished getting ready. No biggie. Once inside, he insisted that I let him show me his dungeon. Dude's apartment was pretty empty, minus a TV and couch, but his bedroom was kitted out. He then wanted the now uncomfortable me to see if the shackles on his bed fit me. Thankfully, I had set up for a friend to call me within the first 30 minutes of the date, and I faked an emergency. We were having the usual get-to-know-you conversation over drinks. I was telling her about how my car was stolen the night before, and her response was, "Don't you just hate blacks?" I never said who stole it. I was out of there. I hadn't even met the guy yet. We were still chatting online to set up the first date. We were going to be busy at different times that weekend, but I was interested and sincerely offered to meet a week later instead. He proceeded to get drunk by himself and sent a ton of sad messages about how he couldn't get a date and he was unattractive and I was totally gonna bail on him. Which wasn't the plan before, but it certainly was now. I have a few. Number 1, he told me I wasn't pretty enough to be so confident. Like, what? I was shocked, but the server came to my rescue and was like, girl, get out of here. No charge for your drink. Number 2, he told me that people looking at his sleeve tat without permission was the equivalent of women being assaulted for wearing skirts. What? Number 3, I sat down across from him and within 5 minutes of meeting me, he tried to slide his hand up my dress under the table. Yikes. Number 4, he told me he had too many back issues of The Economist to read, so he couldn't read anything I might suggest ever. And number 5, he told me his fiancée of 9 years had dumped him the week before. We were back at her place. She pulled out a giant glass jar that was full of what I thought was moonshine. She proceeded to explain to me that it was 100% GHB and that her kink is to be drugged with it before sex. She went into the bathroom and I got the hell out of there so fast that my imprint on the couch probably wasn't gone by the time I was driving. He was a friend of a friend. We went to a restaurant and ordered our food. While we waited, he started to say things like, I'll eat this meal first, then I'll eat you out. I laughed because I thought he's just joking. I thought he's just nervous and his mouth lost his filter. Then when the waitress later asked if we want more to drink, he was like, yes, bring us something strong. I said, not for me, and that I have to drive later and just want a Coke. And he looked at me and was like, don't be stupid. You think we'll just do it once and I'll let you leave? You'll at least stay the night. The waitress looked at me with wide eyes like I'm crazy for even being there. After she left, I told him that he has to stop with this, that it was rude and that we're on our first date. He apologized and for 10 minutes it was okay. Then, as if a switch was turned on, he said just like that, mid-sentence, without even ending his previous story, you know what, I can't control myself anymore. Either we go now or I'll screw you on this table. I told him I have to go to the bathroom. He complained like a baby that we have to go now. I went away anyway and went to the waitress, paid for the food, and left without a word. She wouldn't stop making fun of me. She was 26 and I was 36. Though if it matters, we were at the same place in our careers and income. She kept making jokes about my age, about how old and decrepit I was. Eventually, after telling her pretty directly to lay off, I just said, you know, I'm not enjoying this. I'm gonna go, and paid for the table and left. Later, she said it was because she was overcompensating because she was self-conscious about how much younger she was. But that just means that when she's uncomfortable, she goes straight to demeaning the other person. It only happened once. She kept talking about her ex. I asked if she wanted to get back with him. She said, I don't know, and showed me a picture of him. I couldn't leave fast enough. I drove us. I started to parallel park. I had been working and parking in San Francisco for years by then, and he said, I'll park this for you. Women don't do well at parallel parking. At dinner, he was dismissive only to female waitstaff. I ran into these two hilariously drunk surfer dudes on my way from the bathroom, and they told me my date was a jerk. We laughed about it, and I went back to my table. When leaving, the drunk dudes were also outside. I said bye to them, and Jerkface had the nerve to bark, she's with me. I told him to wait while I got in the car and unlocked the doors. Except I didn't. I drove off and left him standing there. The two drunk dudes whooped and yelled, go lady, go! Such an awesome finish to a terribly embarrassing date. It seemed to be going all right for a while. We meet late afternoon and went for a stroll around town, doing a bit of a pub crawl with a drink at each, followed by some food at a monthly food truck festival I knew about, which was going to be followed by a local bar and dancing. I kept seeing the same guy at all the locations, obviously following us. On a toilet break, I mentioned something to one of the pub doormen, who asked him to leave politely, although that got a little heated. She ran over to the doorman and explained that it was her husband. They had a thing of watching each other go out with someone and maybe watching them have sex. I did drop in a question if they had ever done more, like stealing from someone, and she accidentally said that it happened, but only a couple of times, before trying to say that she didn't mean it. I left them with the doormen and reported them to the police. I go to a bar and meet this cute girl and we get along pretty fine. She invites me back to her place, but it turns out that she was with her friends at the bar and they were just giving her some space for us to talk. They were all drunk, and her friend was insisting on driving home, so her friend, agreed to let me drive them home, because the friend was very set on not leaving her truck parked outside a bar overnight. We get all the way to their apartment complex, and then getting into the parking spot was tricky. So the drunk friend/truck owner insisted on parking, and pulled the "I legally own this vehicle" card. I was some guy her friend met at a bar, so I was like, okay then. Within 5 seconds, she backs the truck into a drainage ditch and gets it stuck. We all have to push the truck and get covered in mud. While we're doing that, the girl I met at the bar had lost her wallet. So I dug through the mud water ditch at like 4 a.m. and didn't find her wallet. We get back to her place and the mood is definitely ruined. So we end up eating a random cheese and meat platter from Safeway on her kitchen floor at like 4 a.m. I sleep on the couch and wake up early and I think, well, she was great. It was just the whole truck thing that ruined it. I look for a pen and paper to write down my number before leaving. All I can find is a piece of paper taped to the inside of the door. It was a court date for a domestic violence/abuse hearing. I just left and chalked it up as a strange night. When he asked me to change my clothes because they weren't sexy enough and told me what I had to order for food, he ended the date by talking about his gun collection. Blind date set up by my grandparents. I love my granddad, and he's done so much for me, so I went. We met at a bar where my best friend worked. We get drinks and I'm talking to my friend. My date says, "This homo trying to hook up with you?" 1, he's not gay. 2, it wouldn't matter if he was. 3, he was just checking in on me. So I'm already done with him at this point, but my ride is still over an hour away. His mate shows up at one point and starts trying to flirt with me. It was gross. My date then starts asking about my hot friends and if I can get them to come out. I said, I like my friends, so no. He starts being racist against Pacific Islanders and was horribly rude to this German guy there drinking. When my ride gets there, I said, I'm leaving. He says, I got a big one for you. You should come home with me. I said, thanks, but I'd rather gouge out my eyes. The next day, he messaged me and said, you probably think I'm a bit of a jerk after last night, but do you want to go out again? I had no intentions of ever seeing him again. So I explained why his behavior was unacceptable and suggested he try making friends who are girls so he sees them as something other than a hole to stick his prick in. I told my grandparents everything. They told his parents, and apparently his dad was super embarrassed. My grandparents were then informed to stay out of my love life. And anytime they brought it up, I just say, I got a big one for you. You should come home with me. I work in fine dining. A friend of mine showed up to my restaurant on a first date with a guy who arrived drunk as a skunk. She's an absolutely beautiful, hilarious woman with a great career. Truly a catch. Friday night, full restaurant. Their tables in the middle of the floor where everyone could see. He continued to burn through 3 bottles of wine. Started making some bad jokes about her looking loose. She suggested he stop drinking. He reached across the table and slapped her. We all ushered her out, and a bunch of men at the other tables were about to beat his butt, but we held them back until he paid his bill. He didn't have enough money and said he was planning on making her split the $300 tab with him. We called the cops. Bye, Patrick. Another time, I helped a woman sneak out the back of our restaurant after eavesdropping on her horrible date. Their table was right by the service station. He'd spent the entirety of the date complaining about his ex-girlfriend's eating disorder. From the moment they sat down and ordered drinks. Oh wow, you're having wine? That's so refreshing. My ex was anorexic. She had to count calories of everything. And the dude just never stopped. The woman dipped out in between the first and second course. He did a racist impression of his Asian professor while we were having dinner in a Vietnamese restaurant. He picked me up and drove though, so I couldn't leave on the spot. When we got in his car after dinner, he asked if I wanted to go back to his place. I made up an excuse as to why I couldn't. He made 2 calls on Bluetooth to hang out with other people while I was still in the car. It wasn't even while driving back. The car was still in park. All of this happened in about 10 minutes. I got to the bar after him. He had a glass of water on the table and slid it to me after I sat down. I said it's okay, he could have it, and I would wait to get my own. He scoffed and told me I don't know anything about being roofied, and I do. At 3 minutes in, he asked me if he could add me on Facebook so that he could touch himself to my photos. He told me I should stop going to the gym because he could barely get me as is, and if I lost weight, I'd be too hot and he'd have no chance. He then tried to get me to go back to his place, and I declined. He offered to let me sleep on his couch to make the idea more appealing. He then bragged about how much money he had, asked me how short I was on rent, saying he'd give me the money right now. I was not short on rent and never said I was. Told me he could afford an UberX but would buy me an Uber pool home because he didn't know me that well. Lastly, he asked me not to BS him and be honest. Would I go on a second date with him? I said no. He stood up and screamed at me in the bar about how I'm the most shallow person he'd ever met, and that the only possible reason I would say no is because he's not good looking enough for me. He stared at my chest the entire time and told me he was in love with me. We had known each other 3 days. What made you straight up nope out of a relationship? How about things that should have been red flags, but I was too naive to recognize? Left notes on my car windshield when I was at work or a friend's house or the store. It seemed sweet, but I realized later that was my significant other keeping tabs on me, even when I didn't say where I was. Would let me know how much a hitman cost and that it was cheaper than you'd expect. Would tell me something and then later say that it was a lie or a test, as though I should have figured that out instead of expecting the truth. Expected me to answer every call, and would get angry if I wanted to end the call first. And lastly, complained about my friends and family all the time. All of them. Apparently, everyone I knew was manipulative and or rude. I didn't figure out this was an attempt to isolate me until after we broke up. He had already shown very jealous tendencies and had smacked me over the head because he thought I was looking at a guy, so it wasn't good already. We were outside of his friend's house and his friend asked how I was doing, and he got mad at me for answering. I just got in my car and drove away. I kept having to call the cops to calm down my wife after she became addicted to a slew of prescription drugs. I told her doctors that opiates for a ruptured vertebra, stimulants for ADHD, Ambien for most nights to help her sleep, and an assortment of others for anxiety and depression, and more to combat side effects, made her violent. One of the times that I called the cops to calm the situation down during a bad episode just made me cry. All he had to say was that he had already been there and asked when it would stop. I thought I'd been holding things together reasonably well. I had an office job where no one knew what was up, though my work had suffered greatly. I kept clothes and food in my trunk, just in case I had to stay out for a bit because she decided I was part of the conspiracy. I had a gym on the way to work where I could shower or just have some downtime. I did all of our housework and errands because she couldn't work or do much of anything most of the time. Each time she cut herself, she told the hospital it was an accident, and she always tried to go to a different one. We lived in a major metro between hospitals. The cop saw through it. Being seen like that and knowing that even that lifestyle was running out hurt. I'm now recovering from the divorce and enjoying the calm. I still sometimes panic for no reason, and I feel more comfortable with clothes and food stashed in the trunk, but I feel much healthier. I get more sleep, my blood pressure has normalized for the most part, and I don't cry at work anymore. I received a message that clearly wasn't meant for me. We had just had our first date, which went really well, calling me cheap and a slimeball and how I'm on my last chance to make things right on her coming birthday with lots of presents. I replied, "Hi, this is X. We just met and had one date. Was that message for someone else?" She replied pretending to be her 12-year-old sister. Then apparently her dad messaged me with how he's told off his younger daughter. I'm out. Screw that. Showing up at my door when I hadn't disclosed my address. For clarification, I'm a guy and we'd only just started dating. I'm very aware of giving out my address until I know who I'm dealing with. I don't want to end up with a stalker if things go sour. It happened anyway in this case. After maybe 2 years of him constantly trying to make me jealous, we temporarily had a 16-hour time difference as I was traveling home to see my grandparents. When I was asleep for maybe 7 hours because, well, it was nighttime and hadn't responded to his 50 texts, he finally said that he was going to spend some time with other girls for 7 hours that day because that's how long I was probably going around spreading my legs. I don't know why, but at that moment, it was like a moment of clarity, and I just replied okay, blocked him, his family, and all his friends, and just moved on. He followed me on a night out and got on his knees stopping traffic in the middle of a city center street to declare his love. We'd been on 2 dates. He also told me that same night he could see into the future and already knew he was going to die defending my honor while I was carrying our twins. Yeah, he was fun. She told me she was on birth control. Turns out she thought drinking a lot of Mountain Dew would make it so she couldn't get pregnant. We were married for 6 years. I started out thinking she was just struggling with depression and anxiety sometimes, but things kept escalating. I walked away when she started threatening to stab me in my sleep. We had already tried several couples therapists and individual therapists, but she refused to consider medication. I called her to meet up and try to find some closure, but she cut me off telling me I wasn't allowed to leave her, and as punishment, she was sleeping with 2 other guys. At that point, I just ignored her number and filed for divorce. I hope she's doing well, but I'm glad to not be afraid for my life anymore. We weren't in a relationship per se, but I had a developing thing with a guy once. Until one day when I wasn't around, he and some other friends of ours went to a bar, and he sneakily slipped stronger alcohol into some other girl's drink there. This girl was apparently talking a lot with one of our other friends and not showing much attention to him. So he grew jealous and threw this friend on the floor and started to strangle him. He was obviously thrown out of the bar after that, and later tried to play it off as just a joke and just messing around. How do you jokingly try to strangle someone? Anyway, I dropped this guy out of my life right after I found out. I definitely wouldn't want to be stuck with someone like that. My most recent ex would always ask me random questions, like, what would you do if someone came running towards us right now? Bearing in mind that's pretty vague, I'd answer something like, move out of the way so they can keep running. And she'd say, wrong answer. Then get mad at me because she meant to attack us, and I didn't say I'd jump in the way to defend her. And she used to ask all sorts of very different vague questions, and when I'd answer, she'd say, wrong answer, and get mad at me for not answering the way she wanted me to. Got out of there as quickly as I could. She picked me because I had the same first name, general appearance, and lived in the same area of the state as her ex-fiancé of 2 years. That she had just been dumped by a month before we met. I felt even more offended about all of that than just being straight up rejected. I'm a black person. My bestest buddy in the whole world is a white person. We were roomies at one point. He brought a date over, I met her, nothing weird. But as it turned out, she had a problem with my bromeo living with a black person, being me. He immediately broke it off with her. I don't have many friends, but I'd like to think I have quality over quantity. I had a huge crush on her for a while, but never had the opportunity to talk to her given our weird work schedules. Then a friend from work sets us up, and I was elated. First date goes really well, and we hit it off. We start spending as much time as we can around each other, talking on the phone every night, all the special things you do when you're starting a new relationship. Then she starts coming over more often unannounced. She would stay for a couple of nights, then a week, then 2 weeks. I would come home from work and she would be in my house, sometimes drunk. The thing was, she had almost been fired for an incident involving alcohol before and was lying to them about her sobriety. She would have a few too many, then go off about her family or how I wasn't taking our 2-month relationship serious enough. The final straw dropped on Valentine's Day this year. She gets annihilated to the point of not being able to walk on her own. After I refuse her drunk advances, she flips out. What followed was a couple hours of her threatening to drive home drunk, sitting outside so the cold weather would freeze her to death, laying in my bed and wailing my name until her voice was hoarse, and alternating between maniac laughter and crying. 2 days later, once she was sobered up, I told her to kick rocks. We had dated for just around 3 months. Quickest turnaround ever for me in a relationship. This happened on the second date. For context, we'd known each other since we were kids. Flirted a lot over the years as casual friends. Not close friends, just acquaintances. Then decided to try dating in our 20s. Him. Do you want to get married someday? Me. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not even sure if marriage is right for me. I kinda just want to travel and build a career and stuff. That's all I'm thinking about right now. Him. What about in 5 years' time? Me. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, if it's the right man, maybe. Him. I've loved you ever since we were kids. Me. Thanks. Him. If we were together 5 years from now, would you marry me? Me. I'm not really sure. Spoiler alert, at this point, I'm desperate to run away. Him. I'd hit a girl if she didn't marry me after 5 years. Like, straight up beat her. Yeah. Bye-bye to the friendship, too. She talked a lot about hating guys being cheap on dates. First date, I take her to a really good sushi place and spend like $120 cause I wanted to be nice. She said she would pay for us next time cause she was extremely flattered. For the second date, she chose the place and she took me to McDonald's. For context, she isn't broke, even gets triple what I make. Like, I don't really care where you take me, but come on, man. Why set the bar so high only to immediately ignore it when you have to be even? She told everybody she knew about any little disagreement. Anytime I could be perceived as unreasonable, it was everybody's business. But somehow the surprises, special dates, lending her cousin rent money, all of that was never brought up. Just the negative stuff was public knowledge. Genuinely feared for my safety. I went over and we got in an argument, so I slept on the floor essentially. I went to the bathroom to text one of my buddies to come pick me up, since I thought she'd fallen asleep. I suddenly get a text from her saying, "Where are you?" And my phone made a sound. I froze up and opened the bathroom door and she was already standing there waiting for me in the darkness. She didn't say a word at all, just stared at me until I walked by. I went back to my spot on the floor and got under the blanket and pretended to be going asleep until she did. After about 30 minutes, I decided to peek out from under the covers, and she was literally towering over me in the darkness with her eyes wide open the entire time. I got out of there so fast. He didn't have a car, so I'd help him with rides to work. He worked third shift at Toys R Us stocking shelves. I picked him up one night, and he was so drunk he could barely stand. I made some comment about how he isn't going to be able to work. He started throwing things at me in the parking lot. I threw his stuff on the ground and left him there. I've dealt with too many alcoholics, and I wasn't wasting any more of my time. Cut to 5 years later, he's sober now and getting married this year, so good for him. My brother came to visit me. After I spent the whole day with my girlfriend, it was time to see my brother because we didn't see each other for a long time. We prepared some snacks and were about to start Lord of the Rings because both of us love Lord of the Rings. She called me and started a long conversation on the phone. I told her my brother was waiting for me, and she said that I can't spend my time with anyone because it belongs to her. It was the last talk between the two of us. We had dinner plans. She didn't show up and didn't pick up her phone all evening. Then she turned up at around midnight in her car hammered. I tried to take her keys and she ran out of the house. I followed. She then drove her car at me. I called her brother to come pick her up. The next morning, I dropped her car and her belongings at her place and said goodbye. We went to the mall and stopped by this little kiosk selling cookies. I decided that I would get one cookie. The lady working there said if I buy two, I get one free. I decided to buy two and get the third one free. My date went off on this lady saying she's trying to scam me, etc., etc. He was legit yelling so loud that it was echoing through the mall. It was so embarrassing. If you're rude to people in customer service, you're not for me. When my now ex-wife came to the living room where I was sleeping on the couch after a fight and started lunging at me, she asked me if she reminded me of my stepdad who used to come in my room at night and stand over me before he dragged me out of bed by my ankles. He would then put the boots to me for whatever sins I had committed that day. She was the only person I had ever shared this with. She went out of town for work 2 days later, and when she came home, I was gone and in another state. It was remarkable the amount of abuse I put up with to that point. It dawned on me then that if he had returned to my life, I wouldn't let him hurt me. So there was no reason to let her abuse me either. I dated this girl who was jealous, and I mean super jealous. I couldn't hang out with any of my friends without her constantly calling me. Obviously, I couldn't do the same because how could I be jealous? That would have meant I didn't trust her. That's annoying enough to end a relationship, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. After 9 months, I found out from one of my friends, who also happened to be a close friend of hers, that she'd been hiding her sexuality to me. She was actually bi. At first, I didn't really get why she did that, because I absolutely have no problem with these things. A mutual friend then told me she was going around messing around with other chicks. So basically she was hiding her bisexuality so that she could have sex with any girl she wanted to without me even suspecting anything. Sometimes she even had threesomes with the girls' boyfriends. When I told her I knew everything, she started telling me that she didn't want me to know because those people didn't really matter for her and she didn't love them. Needless to say, I noped out of there. It was already on the rocks from roughly around the time the millionth drunken argument happened. However, the moment that sealed it was when she said something to me along the lines of, "If your dad wanted to be alive, he would still be here." My dad died in a car accident 3 years before that. Immediately went from loving her enough to make it work to thinking that she was the most vile person on earth. My brother took a girl to a high-end sushi place, and his date ordered 3 times the food he did. He just got a grilled salmon. She ate almost none of it, and at the end, she said she ordered all the extras so she could take some home for tomorrow. When the waiter showed up for the bill, she excused herself to go to the bathroom. The waiter asked my brother if he wanted to split the check, and at that point, my brother did the right thing and stuck her with $100 worth of sushi and booze. The girl returned to see a huge check at her seat. After our first date, she sent me a Google Maps pin of my address with just "ha ha" as the only context. I hadn't told her my address. She then followed it up with asking how my boss was by using his first name. I hadn't mentioned the name of anyone I worked with. That level of stalker made me pull the eject handle real quick. It started with me telling her that it must have been great to grow up with parents from different cultures. On the second date, after her talking uninterrupted about her family's background for 45 minutes. No irony from me or anything, just a straight up positive and genuine comment. This was followed by 30 minutes of full emotional breakdown in a packed bar and loud comments about my perception of race, which was then followed by intense stare downs from every patron in the bar, which was then followed by the waiter swooping in with shots for her, asking to pay her bill, and asking me if I needed to leave. I felt bad about triggering some sort of trauma, but yeah. I was publicly accused of racism on the second date. Always wondered what the third date had in store, but didn't stick around to find out. She showed up late at my place one night because she couldn't sleep at her place alone. I was fine with that until she started talking about the reason why. When she was alone, the demons in the corners and edges of the room would fill the dark spots and watch with their glowing eyes. I urged her continuously to get help, to go to the doctor, but she wouldn't do it. What she was seeing was real. I felt terrible leaving her for that, but I wasn't equipped to deal with someone who needed professional help and refused it. She came to stay for the first time. It was the night before New Year's Eve and we were planning to go out drinking for New Year's Eve. I had just worked a 12-hour shift. I was a carpet fitter, so manual labor, and I was exhausted. She had a few drinks and started to get aggressive, because I just wanted to relax that night, but she wanted to go out drinking. We broke up 3 days later. My father was an aggressive drunk when I was a kid, so I could see how it would go. If you know you're an aggressive drunk, get off the drink, man. I was interested in this woman I worked with many years ago, and the feeling was mutual. We had gone bowling a couple of times and we had started talking about potentially dating. She said, if we date, I expect to be taken out at least twice a week, given gifts at least once a week, and we won't have sex for at least 3 months. Considering we had almost the same work schedule, I have no idea how she thought I was going to pull any of that off. Her father recently got into a brawl with a date's teenage kid. I was concerned and asked questions. She then explained how the teen had it coming because they didn't know their place. Feeling confused, I asked her to elaborate again. It turned out that a grown man punched a mentally disabled autistic teen rather than simply walk away. I told her that I refused to date people who are cool with domestic violence. She was immediately remorseful, but then defended her father's drunken violent outburst against a child a few moments later. Don't date people who think that an adult ought to beat mentally disabled children. Not even a relationship, but got very close. Met a guy through a local theater, and I thought he was cool, but then he started following me around everywhere when I was at practice and shows. The last straw was when I didn't get notified that a practice had been cancelled, and he was waiting there, saying, "I just felt like someone would show up." And it absolutely raised my alarm bells. Worst part is, when I tried to get help from the director or other actors, they'd ignore me or try to tell me that he's just trying to be nice and he can't help it. I blocked and deleted his number, and I'm sad to say I haven't gone back to public theater since, as he's still actively involved in most plays in town. I was going through some stuff in my early 20s and was pretty desperate for any kind of affection, which is the only reason I took a couple weeks to back out of this. The second time I ever met her, she told me to delete every girl's number from my phone, sister included. She then came over to my place, saw I had a bookshelf, and ridiculed me for being a reader, and in the same breath announced that she loved cocaine so much and wanted me to try it. Finally, I escaped, but by then she was already sleeping with 2 of my friends, who are obviously no longer my friends. The good news is I've now been happily married for 5 years and consider myself so incredibly lucky. When I wasn't allowed to hang out with my male friends in broad daylight, but he thought it was okay to hang out with girls he didn't know in the middle of the night, that was a major red flag. I was dating a really cool guy and everything was going great, and then about a month in, he started talking baby talk to me, and it did not stop. We had been together for quite a while, 6 to 8 months, and lived together for at least 2 months when I decided to make a tuna salad. I asked how he liked it. He told me. I came back with 2 bowls. Half the can made his way, and half the can made the way I liked it. He completely freaked out. He said, "If we can't agree on how to eat tuna, how will this ever work?" I said that we don't have to agree. We can both have it exactly the way we want and be happy. He strongly disagreed. I started thinking of all of his other controlling behavior and inability to compromise. It wasn't that day that we broke up, but it was definitely the day our relationship broke. The cheating didn't help either. Waiters of Reddit, what's the most messed up conversation you've overheard while waiting tables? I was bringing a check for a wealthy local businessman who was dining with his girlfriend. It was a big tab and I was already counting the tip when the woman hurled his drink in his face and yelled to an aghast room of people, "You didn't even pay for the abortion!" and stormed out. The man calmly brushed the ice off of his suit and looked around and said, "Not the first time, won't be the last." I wheeled off and gave him the bill later. I had a couple that came in with their kid. It's slow and we have time to take it slow, so I'm just relaxing there when I see the couple getting into an argument. It's clear from the facial expressions that they're getting into a heated argument. Just as I'm about to come over with the bill, before it got even worse, she throws her drink at his face, throws the food on the ground, and leaves with the kid. He's stranded at the restaurant since she took the car and awkwardly stays here for about an hour. We tried to make him comfortable, but it was incredibly awkward. After he left, the police came to our restaurant about 3 hours later asking if he ate here. Turns out he died that night in a hit and run. St. Patrick's Day, working at a pretty busy bar in San Diego. Waiting on a table of fraternity guys from SDSU. No big deal. I take the order and notice something is seriously off with one of the guys. Not like he was hammered or anything, but he was just making a weird face. The bar was crowded and noisy, so his bros didn't notice it. But I walked up by him and was like, "Are you okay?" He looked at me, pale as a ghost, and said, "I just pooped my pants. It's everywhere. It's in my shoes." Now, as a man who's been there, I felt I had to help out. I also worked security at this place, so grabbed the attention of one of the big Tongan bouncers. Took the bouncer aside, and if you don't know this, Tongans are some of the most helpful people around, and told him the deal as I'm starting to smell and see poop. The next thing I know, the 3 big Tongan doormen come out of nowhere and muscle this guy out, just saying the usual, "Sorry guys, but your friend has to go." They took him in the back and already had a clean pair of boxers and jeans for the guy, and let him clean up in the staff bathroom, and one of them actually gave him a ride home. I was busy and didn't see him leave, but got a cool note from their fraternity the next day and an honorary sweatshirt and a gift certificate to Best Buy. I still have it somewhere. He got to save face with the girls they were with, and they were all regulars after that, and tipped really well. There was this group of 4 elderly women who would come into my family's restaurant once a month. One month, one of them came by herself. I asked, "Hi Edith, where are all your friends?" They all died. And she broke into tears. I felt like crap the rest of the night. I worked at a high-end bistro during summers in college, and the rule was even if we were closing at 11 and someone came in at 10:59, we served them. So this older, attractive white man in his 60s came in with a small but built Asian guy in his 20s. They sat across each other at a two-top and just ordered wine and dessert. This was pretty typical, and as they were my last table, I could leave after I had bussed their table and tipped out. So I started packing up the silverware and menus at the tables in my section and doing my other closing duties. I was walking by their table and heard they were having a heated yet quiet argument, as if they didn't want to make a scene. I heard snippets of, "No, $600 and you spend the night," by the older male, and "No, $800, blowjob, 1 round of butt stuff, and I leave when I'm done." And I was mentally like, okay, and left them to negotiate alone. Yeah, I would probably do the same thing. Just let them sort out their business. I mean, it's not as if you can chime in on a conversation like that, right? I was a Waffle House waitress for 4 years in high school. I saw and heard quite a bit. I honestly got used to old truckers asking me if I wanted to make an extra tip in the parking lot at the grand old age of 16. But the one time I literally had to say WTF, I didn't even understand the conversation. 2 Latino couples were sharing a booth and seemed to be having a good time. I don't speak Spanish, but nothing in their tone made it seem unusual. Out of nowhere, one of the husbands grabs his wife by the back of her hair, slams her face into the table, and just goes about his conversation. He didn't even look at her. She wiped her face off and just went back to talking and listening. No one batted an eye at the table. I delivered their food a few minutes later, and all 4 of them seemed like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. I've called out dozens of customers in my day. You can say pretty much whatever you want as a Waffle House waitress since it's not exactly a classy joint, but I had no idea how to respond to that scenario. I once waited on a couple that broke up while I was waiting on them. They came separately. The wife showed up first. She was very chipper and friendly, and I grabbed her a water while she was waiting on her husband. The husband showed up around 10 minutes later. When I went to the table to grab his drink, I could hear her saying, "What's wrong? What's your deal? Just talk to me." While I was waiting at the bar for his drink, one of the hosts ran up to me and said, "Hey, I think your table's breaking up." I look up to the corner where they're sitting and the wife is sobbing. Now what do? I have to bring him his drink, even though surely they aren't going to stay and eat now, right? Wrong. I brought him his drink, and when I set it down in front of him, expecting him to tell me thanks but no thanks, we're leaving, he says, "Do you know what you want?" Through her tears, she says, "Yes," and orders. What the heck? I have to wait on these people now. I then have one of the most awkward tables of my life, having to keep up my peppy attitude and fake smiles while this poor woman's life is crashing down. When it was all over and I set the bill down in front of the husband, I figured he would at least be kind enough to pay the bill. Alas, he pushed it back to me and said, "Can you separate this, please?" This guy's so brutal, I'm surprised he didn't slide you divorce papers to sign as a witness as well. Not really messed up, but just a complete lack of understanding from a privileged person. I worked at a popular restaurant chain while I was in college. This was about 7 years ago. The owners of one of the largest beer breweries in the country came in to eat. They're sitting there eating and the wife says to the husband, "I don't understand what you mean by living paycheck to paycheck." He explains to her what living paycheck to paycheck actually means in a very respectful and unbiased fashion. She still doesn't get it. She questions why these people don't have any money left over after they pay their bills and why they don't just change that, or why their bills are so high, or why they don't just make more money. They were out to eat with another couple who also tried explaining this to her. A solid 10 minutes were spent on trying to educate this woman on the fact that most people don't live like she's used to. All of them sort of gave up trying when they realized she just didn't get it. You could literally see the confusion on her face. It gave me a new perspective on things. It was the last table of my last shift of my last day at this place. 2 top, man and a woman. Both pretty attractive and looking extremely happy to be out on a date together. The meal goes smoothly. They ask for the check. I bring it. Upon returning to grab their credit card, I ask if they'd like me to box up their leftovers. He says sure, and just as I'm leaning in to grab her plate of pasta, she looks him dead in the eye while holding his hand and says, "I'm pregnant." I freeze a bit, then silently carry their plates back to the kitchen. I was so shocked that I was on autopilot mode and accidentally threw their leftovers away. The guy was not very hungry after that anyway. Too bad you threw it away. She's eating for two now, you know. I waited tables and bartended in the late 80s after college. Two ladies sat down at a table in my section. I greeted them and got them water. A man showed up and instantly turned pale. Turns out it was his wife and his girlfriend, and they had found out about each other and set him up. He had his head in his hands the whole time. I didn't hear a lot of what they were saying, but the pieces I did hear were unpleasant. Two guys sitting at my bar top, looking super shady, decided they were going to scout out for ladies. Now, if you've worked in a continuously loud environment, you know that people will say anything when they think you can't hear them. Man, that was stupid. What about the blonde with the blue dress? Nah, I was thinking of that one. He pointed to a smaller one, more fragile looking brunette, sitting by herself. They get quiet for a bit before the first guy asks, "Are you sure you want to do this?" The second guy, "That's what she gets for dressing like that. Let's hope she's parked in the back." I said screw that and called the police. They were asked to leave and one of the officers offered to follow the girl home. Kudos to our original poster on this one because he prevented what could have been a very dangerous situation for this girl. I waited tables at the Olive Garden 10 years ago. Not really messed up as much as it was funny. A guy and his wife sat down at a table and immediately started arguing. Something about his affair and how a baby from it was costing them money. Finally, it culminated as I was bringing out their salad, and as I walked away, I heard the wife say, "Maybe if you hadn't boned our son's girlfriend and gotten her pregnant, we could afford to eat somewhere nicer than Olive Garden. Oh look, the highlight of my meals, unlimited bagged salad. Maybe you could save up and we could go to Joe's Crab Shack for our anniversary." I hate to say it, but maybe this relationship should just come to an end at this point. That sounds like a messed up situation. A waitress at our restaurant, a wealthy but crazy 45-year-old divorcee, was written up 4 times for saying obscene things to guests. The last straw, she gave a plate of food to a man at the bar with a huge mustache and said, "Nice mustache, I'd like to sit on your face," and carried on back to the kitchen as if she'd said nothing at all. You hear a lot of things and I try not to judge, but the two that just stick out in my mind the most are number 1, the first time, please note that's the first, a mother handed me her child's bottle and asked me to fill it with Coke. And number 2 was a table of 3. A mom and her 2 kids, maybe about 7 and 5. She's ignoring me on her phone, not paying attention to anything. The kids are super polite, and I ask what they'd like to drink. And the little girl says, "Can we have some water, please, in the fun cups?" And the mother puts her phone down, snaps at that child, and I swear almost grabs her and says, "No, you'll have a Diet Coke. Get them a Diet Coke." "But Mom, we're thirsty." "Shut it." Kids just wanted some water. I don't understand people. I really don't understand why it had to be Diet Coke over water. Is there some secret added benefit to Diet Coke that I don't know about? People often don't realize that when you're sitting at the bar, the bartenders hear everything. Sometimes I talk with the guests, but sometimes people have really intense and private conversations like less than a meter away from me. I'll just keep my head down and rinse glasses and pour drinks and basically pretend I'm really busy. Just yesterday, there were 2 guys in their early 20s talking about how their girlfriends were total pains who nagged and complained all the time. They drank a lot of tequila and whiskey, and at one point, one guy said to the other, "You should just sleep in my place, you can't drive like this." The other disagreed, and they got into a drunken argument, and at one point the guy who suggested the sleepover grabbed the other guy's face and said, "F you," and then they just started making out, just out of the blue, sloppy and drunk making out. It was weird and hilarious. This is my boss's story from when she used to work at a fast food joint. The cashier was a girl who had a short pixie haircut. There was a group of Jehovah's Witnesses that came in and insisted to my manager that they get a different cashier because they don't want any lesbians serving them. The girl was recovering from cancer and has been regrowing her hair. They were immediately kicked out. It was one of the rudest things I've ever heard. I was working as a hostess at a local chain restaurant. The host stand is right next to the bar. There was an older couple, probably in their 70s, eating and having a drink at the bar. They start to walk out with their arms around each other and giggling. Then the woman accidentally drops their box of leftovers. She starts cracking up and says, "I just tossed you a salad." And still with arms around each other, laughing hysterically, they walk out. Made my week. Had to throw in at least one nice story for you guys. Former waitress here. I used to work at a sports bar grill type place that did a pretty good weekday lunch business. One day, I was waiting on a group of guys at a round table having a work lunch. They were discussing business and sharing spreadsheets and things like that. At one point, I was walking up to the table to check on them, and the guy with his back towards me was fiddling with his BlackBerry. And as I get closer, I can see he's watching adult material. Keep in mind, this was long enough ago that internet on phones wasn't nearly as common as it is now, so it was kind of crazy. Dudes carrying on a conversation about financial strategies while watching adult content in the middle of a restaurant. I just got their refills and made sure to approach the table from a different angle when I came back. When I was in the front retail section of a certain country-style chain restaurant, I saw a very young boy studying the toys and gifts while his mother was talking to the hostess. At the time, we had a toy squid with a little propeller that was lazily drifting around the little display tank. Once he saw it, his eyes went wide and he yelled in shock, "That looks just like Mommy's toy!" All of the color drained from her face as she ran over, grabbed his wrist, and fled the restaurant, never to be seen again. Way to be subtle, kid. Jeez. I'm German, but live in an Asian country, so it's not very common to meet other people who are German. I was waitressing as a summer job, and one night I was serving this old man who was there with a group of friends. As soon as he sat down, he told his friends in German, "I wouldn't pay $10 to sleep with that slave," talking about one of my Filipino coworkers. I proceeded to continue serving the table the entire night, and the old guy kept on saying more messed up racist stuff about my other Filipino coworkers. When he asked for the bill, I let my coworkers know about the terrible stuff that guy had been saying. The manager, who was also Filipino, confronted him about it, but the old man denied all the allegations. It ended with the racist jerk paying and walking out of the restaurant, stammering to his friend, "How did he know what we were talking about?" I chose that moment to say to them in German with a huge grin, "Good night and thank you for dining with us." Needless to say, the expression on his face was priceless. Sometimes people say really horrible things about other people for no good reason just because they think others can't understand them. It's quite sickening, really. I waited on a table with two young couples on a date. As I approached to clear their table, I overheard them talking about sex. They immediately went quiet once they saw me approach while smirking not too subtly to each other. I asked them if it was good, and they said they enjoyed it greatly. Upon which I asked, "And how was the food?" They erupted in laughter, and I got a very generous tip. Good times. I work as a bartender once a week. Just last night, an attractive couple came in. They honestly already looked halfway smashed. For a while, I thought I heard a faint buzzing noise, but didn't think much of it. As I come up behind them to serve them food, the lady embraced her man and said, "Oh God, turn this thing off before I lose my mind." I understand public displays of affection, but this is just incredibly awkward for anyone else around you. Please don't do this. I used to work at a family burger joint that was part of a large chain. We saw a lot of birthday parties and stressed out parents. This one afternoon, a smallish group came in to celebrate a toddler's birthday. There were 2 couples and 5 kids under the age of 5. Now, anyone getting this table would think, oh no. You're looking at a bunch of kids' meals, which means getting a bunch of drinks and refills for barely any cost and therefore barely any tip. But I figure I'll make this a fun party for them, and maybe they'll leave a nice tip out of gratitude. Yeah, right. The moment I get to this table, one of the women thrusts a bottle at me, saying it's breast milk which she wants me to heat up with hot water. I smile and say no problem. Hungry babies are crying babies, and it's not like I'd be grossed out by breast milk, especially when it's in a bottle. I'm sure she wants the milk quickly, so I hand the job off to my supervisor while I get the other 9 drinks for the table. When I get back to my section with the drink tray, the lady stands up and yells at me, "If you have a problem with someone, why don't you say it to their face?" It took me a moment to realize that she thought I'd handed the milk to my supervisor because I was grossed out by it. "Oh, no," I said. "There's no problem, ma'am. I just knew I'd be a minute with these other drinks and I figured you'd get the milk sooner, so..." "I don't want to hear it. This is terrible customer service and I'm disgusted." Turning to her friends, she told them, still yelling, "I can't even be here anymore. "I'm sorry, but this party is ruined. I'm leaving." And she marched out, dragging her now crying children and leaving both my shift leader and I standing agape in the middle of the section. The worst part was, her friends had to try and finish their poor child's birthday party after this. The birthday boy was crying, and his parents looked like they might want to join him. And of course, no apologetic tip or words were forthcoming. Yeah, I hate to say it, but a lot of the times you're not going to get a tip in that situation. They're not going to be in a great mood, meaning they're not going to be feeling very generous towards you. So you get to deal with all that for pretty much nothing. Sorry. I generally try not to eavesdrop on my guests, and at busy times I find myself keeping 5 or 6 different objectives prioritized in my brain, so I don't hear a lot. Every so often, though, a certain word or turn of phrase will make it through and capture my attention. The most recent of these that comes to mind was a lady I'd guess to be in her mid-20s who, completely straight-faced, told her dining partner, "No, seriously, dead is way better than broken up. At least with dead, I know where he is and what he's up to." That's a little concerning. Maybe you should have called the police. I walked up to the table with a young newly married couple. They seemed to be in conversation, but I was busy, so I didn't have time to wait for them to finish. As soon as I walked up, I heard the girl say, "If you ever lie to me again, I swear to God I will poop on your pillow." There was an awkward pause before I said, "Hi, what can I get y'all to drink?" I worked at a fine dining restaurant during college, overlooking the lake, white tablecloths, $300 bottle of wine, the whole bit. One night, the matriarch of a family company that is incredibly wealthy and well-known came in with some of the company's executives. It's my table, but a large one. So one of our male servers, I'm female, was helping me take initial drink orders. The entire group ignores me and speaks only to him. My first clue that maybe this isn't going to go well. But whatever, that's fine. Maybe they're just confused about who the lead server is. I pop out to the bar to start getting their drinks from the bar staff. And while I'm out there, our maitre d' comes up to me, "Your table has requested that male server to be the one to take care of them." Ouch. Okay, there goes the money I'm gonna make tonight, but okay. Later, I'm walking past their table with a few dirty dishes in my hands, and I hear the matriarch say, "Now there's her proper place." This was in 2011. About a month ago, I served a couple that was celebrating their 30th anniversary. They were dressed to the nines and looking very happy together. I offered to take a picture of them when I saw them awkwardly attempting a selfie. I shot a few pictures and handed her the phone back. When I went to take his empty plate, I noticed he had kind of a frantic look on his face, but I couldn't gauge the situation. Turns out, the phone was his, not hers. 5 minutes later, she's flipping out about a girl named Candy, who he was apparently texting during their anniversary dinner. Dude obviously didn't care at all. They end up in an all-out brawl, with everyone in the restaurant watching. Needless to say, I got stiffed for the $110 check, and I'm sure he'll always blame me for getting caught. Redditors who grew up with strict parents, what was the craziest rule or punishment you had to deal with? When I was in first grade, I had a writing homework assignment. My dad used to be weird about me erasing because he wanted me to do it right the first time. I ended up erasing a lot on this homework, and my dad took the paper from me, ripped it in half, and told me to start over. Turns out it was the last sheet of paper in the entire house, and I don't remember why, but for some reason we couldn't go and buy more paper that night. So, ironically, I ended up having to completely erase an old homework assignment in order to have a sheet of paper to start over on. I'm 22 now and still give him crap about this. How is starting over on a new piece of paper any different than erasing what you were already doing? I don't really understand the logic on this one. The word disgusting was banned and could have been considered just as bad as saying the F word. We weren't allowed to close doors unless we were in the bathroom. We weren't allowed to watch Cartoon Network because it was garbage. They actually put a parental lock on Cartoon Network. The worst punishment was one time they decided that we were such bad kids, my sister was like 14 and I was 12-ish, that they took everything we owned and bagged it up into garbage bags and made us carry them out to a burn pile, and they burnt everything we owned. All of my childhood memorabilia, pictures, clothes, diaries, everything. All of it burnt. It was kind of messed up. When it was done burning, the next day or so later, my sister and I looked through the ashes, and all that was left were 2 silver rings of hers that we cleaned off and kept. It was kind of crazy. I once got beaten and locked in the basement because my hands were literally not large enough to play a certain piano piece. I couldn't play an octave separation yet. Before you ask, yes, I am Asian. I didn't ask, but makes sense. I wasn't allowed to use public restrooms. I ruined our Disney trip because of how many times we had to go back to the hotel, which wasn't on site. And I was 6 years old at the time. I quite honestly had accidents when I was far too old to do so because my parents had my teachers reporting bathroom use to them too. There was no place I could safely use the restroom, other than home. Without getting into trouble, that is. Finally, I got to use public restrooms without punishment when I went to college. No, I'm not kidding. But I got pretty good at hiding restroom use in high school because the high school refused to report it to my parents. Why did none of these teachers spot the abuse? My parents once grounded me for 2 years for getting a B on my report card. Took everything out of my room besides the bed, and I wasn't allowed to do anything with friends. A year and a half into it, I asked if I could be ungrounded. And at that point, they'd actually forgotten what they'd grounded me for, but refused because I must have done something bad if they grounded me. Also, they refused to let me stay up past 8 p.m., even in high school. If it's not important enough for you to remember, then it's not important enough to take away all of your kids' stuff for 2 whole years. When I was in elementary school at about 6 years old, I used to have accidents because my bladder was too small. My mom would punch me in the bladder when I got home to make me pee myself and make fun of me when I did. I still have issues, and it turns out that my bladder and uterus is messed up from a genetic disease. That's actually just messed up. No talking at the dinner table other than the occasional "do you want some more blank" or "pass the blank." We couldn't talk about anything at all. No small or idle chat was allowed. First time you did it, you got yelled at. Second time was a whooping and then sent to your room until the next day, without the rest of your meal. I make it a point now with my kids to chat up a storm each and every meal. You could earn a full-on whooping for uttering any of the following: shut up, but, or accusing someone of lying for any reason. We were not permitted to use the words lie, liar, or lying. Instead, we had to say, "That's not the truth," or "That doesn't sound right," or any other phraseology that wasn't some iteration of the word lie. This sounds like there's some deeper damage going on in your parents' psyche around the word lie. Otherwise, I don't see why they'd be so sensitive about the word. As the eldest son of a Southern Baptist preacher, I was held to some high standards. Being seen and not heard, and that my every action was a reflection of my father as a leader to his congregation. I found music to be a great outlet, but of course any non-Christian music was not allowed and immediately destroyed upon discovery. Spare the rod, spoil the child was a mantra ingrained in my daily life. Once I was into my teens and spankings with stretched out coat hangers was no longer enough to be considered punishment due to the lack of tears, my father moved on to shaving my head. Nothing like the constant reminder of how untrustworthy one is once their physical source of personal identity is forcibly removed. As soon as you said Southern Baptist preacher, I knew this was going to be bad. My mother is an honest-to-God narcissist. I graduated from high school early at 16 and didn't go to college immediately, so I worked a part-time job while all my friends went to school. Anyways, when all my friends graduated high school, we celebrated by going to the movies. My friend's mom dropped us off and another friend's father was going to be picking us up. My mom was very upset at me going to the movie anyways, since it wasn't going to be over until after 9 p.m., by bedtime at the time. Anyways, finally she lets me go on the condition that my friend's dad gets me home by 10 p.m. My friend's father ran into late night construction on the way home with me and several other friends in the van, and the closer it got to 10 p.m., the more I started freaking out, telling everyone I was going to be in huge trouble if I didn't get home like right now. My friend's father assured me he would speak to my mom and all would be fine. I was the first to be dropped off because I was panicking so severely. The moment the van pulls into the driveway, my mom comes barreling out of the house, telling me she was going to kick my butt for being late and keeping her up. My friend's dad tried to calm her down and separate her from hitting me. That's when she realizes I'm chewing gum. Now, my mother hated gum. Said the only reason you would ever chew gum was to hide something. So naturally, she makes the assumption I was late and chewing gum because I was busy fooling around with my friend's dad. Yeah, that was the only explanation in her mind. She grounded me for 12 weeks, an entire summer. I wasn't allowed to have a phone, cell phone, TV, or books the entire summer. Every morning, my mom would take the cable box, home phone handset, and keyboard to make sure I couldn't do anything. Needless to say, my friends never invited me anywhere again gun in fear that my mom would call the cops and accuse me of fooling around with their dad. She also used to report my car stolen if I didn't call her back when I was in college. What's going on with your mom that's the first thing that her mind goes to? Who does she think you are? Shouldn't she be more confident in how she raised you? I dealt with a narcissistic and abusive mother, and most of my punishments weren't huge because I was a really good kid. But on my 18th birthday, because I asked for gas money the day before, the first time ever, she took mine and her car keys with her to work, and took the shed key so I couldn't even ride my bike. She left a note on the kitchen table saying, "Happy 18th, now you're an adult, so get out of my house." I spent my birthday alone, trapped, and miserable. All over $10. One day, the news said the school might be closed for a cold day, like a snow day, but when it's cold enough, your exposed skin freezes in less than 10 minutes. My mom demanded I start walking to school or she'd report me to the cops as truant. We argued about it, but the TV said school started late that day. I decided to go anyways. That being better than the arguing. She then decided I was to stay home for her to call the cops. I shoved past her, which she yelled at me was assault, and then locked me out of the house. Halfway to school, I was told the school was closed. I had to call my dad to be let into the house again. That day, I promised myself I'd leave home as soon as possible. I've stayed halfway across the country from my mom ever since. Your mom sounds like the type of person that's just looking for and wants to start problems. I don't blame you for wanting to get out of there as soon as possible. My mom was raised in a very strict and abusive environment. When my sister and I became teenagers, she was struggling with mental health issues and also never had a good example of what level-headed parenting looked like. It doesn't excuse some of the things she did, but I'm more understanding now that I'm older. Anyway, the craziest, most out-of-hand moment. My sister and I are 16 months apart in age and had a lot of the same friends in high school. When I was 14 and she was 15, our curfew was 9, but we got a summertime curfew of 10 o'clock. This was before everyone had a cell phone. Our friend was watching the time, but we got caught up in our night games. We were literally playing hide and seek. We lost track of time and realized at 5 after 10 that we were late, and managed to get home by 10 after. My mom was furious and made us sit down at the kitchen table for a 30-minute lecture, during which she slammed a utensil so hard on a plate in front of my sister that glass shards flew into her face. My sister got up and left the room at that point, but when I tried to do the same, my mom put me in a headlock, like freaking WWE style, and I punched her in the back to get her to let go. My sister and I were both grounded for something like 2 weeks, and I got an extra week for hurting my mom. The most ridiculous punishment? My sister, at age 16, picked up smoking cigarettes. She'd been at it for a week. I told her it was on her own head and that it wasn't worth it and she should stop, but she kept doing it. Whatever, not my problem. She, like an idiot, pressed her luck and brought cigarettes into the house, where my mom found them in her room. Our mom would go through our stuff constantly. I literally had to hide any CD with profanity or things like permanent markers that we could get high off of. They separated us and played good cop, bad cop. My sister, again, the idiot, totally bought it when my mom told her I'd blabbed about everything and they knew the truth. I was in the other room denying any knowledge or involvement. Anyway, this happened a week before summer vacation. My sister was grounded for the entire summer vacation. 2 months, no friends, no going out, 10 minutes of phone time a day, no electronics, no internet, no pool, no movie theater, nothing. My punishment? The exact same thing. For not coming to my parents and telling on my sister. My parents also decided to sand and paint the baseboards that summer and forced us to do it all. That summer was literally the worst. I spent a large portion of my teen years being grounded for minor things, or for not being the sister spy. It sucked, especially considering I got decent if not great grades, never drank, smoked, tried drugs, had sex, skipped class, or otherwise got into any kind of trouble. I'm almost 30 and about to have my second kid, and I'm still a little salty about it. My parents tried so hard to keep us from experiencing normal teenage stuff that both me and my sister made some really poor choices once we had the tiniest amount of freedom. That's something I think a lot of parents aren't aware of, is that the harder you push, the harder they pull away. You're gonna be this super strict about your kid, then yeah, the second they have some freedom, they're gonna go nuts. And they don't know how to control themselves because they've never gotten to enjoy fun before. It makes sense that they're gonna get a little carried away. No TV. Not as a punishment, just no TV, ever. Because apparently it lets the devil in. The second as the last kid moved out, they started watching TV all the time. As punishment, my dad would make us face a corner, stand on one leg, and keep both arms straight up in the air for a certain length of time. If our leg or arms went down, he'd double the time. Sometimes he'd give you a surprise visit from his belt or shoe if he was particularly angry. At least I grew up to have fantastic balance. My grandmother was a retired English teacher. One day, I called my brother stupid. I was 4 or so. She filled me in on her rule that if I couldn't spell stupid, but I called someone stupid, then it was really me that was stupid. Thus, I should never call someone a name that I couldn't spell. So, in my 4-year-old head, rather than avoid name calling, I realized that I did know how to spell the word dumb. So that word must be permitted. I spent the rest of the day overusing the word dumb, and she wasn't quite sure what to do at that point. My mom gave me a black eye one night when I came home from a friend's birthday party at a skate rink. She made me tell people that I fell down and got hit in the eye by one of the wheels on a skate. I was 12. It was because I forgot to put away the dishes before I left. She also regularly broke remote controls, throwing them at me, would slam my doors open so hard the doorknobs would smash through the drywall, stole the allowance my granddad gave me, no matter where I hid it, and recently ripped a pair of my headphones out of my ears while I was using them and broke them by repeatedly whipping me in the face with them, then followed it up by punching me a few times in the face. The last instance was about 4 to 5 months ago. I moved out and she regularly contacts me demanding money. I really hope you aren't giving her any money, my friend. We weren't allowed to have food upstairs, but I had food wrappers in my trash can, so they searched my whole room, ripping clothes off hangers, throwing stuff out of drawers, etc. And for 3 months, I wasn't allowed in my room for anything, unless accompanied by one of them. I had to sleep on the couch. I don't understand how parents can take stuff to such an extreme and still think that they're doing right by their child. I have a literal book worth of stories of the abuse I survived through, but one time Dr. Phil's show told my mother that having a bed was a luxury for kids, so she immediately took mine away. I slept on a cold wood floor until I escaped that hellhole and cut off all contact. My dorm in college was the first real bed I'd slept in for 10 years. I didn't own a bed when I moved into my first apartment after college, so I was back on the wood floor. I'd moved in with the clothes on my back, my cat and her stuff, and my laptop, which I used to make money by transcribing at night, while I worked for $7 an hour, 12 hours a week at a deli. It was the only place that would hire me since I didn't have access to my own car. I cried myself to sleep every night on that wood floor. It was a reminder of how much I'd failed, leaving myself back in that position. My roommate must have heard me crying one night and figured it was back pain, because they lent me an air mattress to sleep on. It was like I'd moved into a 4-star hotel. Eventually, I saved up a spare $50 and bought a bed off Craigslist. Sketchy, but I hadn't owned my own bed in 16 years before that. I still have the bed and refuse to part with it because I don't want to end up on the floor again. I have many chronic back problems that I don't think will ever be fixed due to being forced to sleep on the floor starting at age 7. I take pain meds when I can and do yoga, but it doesn't help. Sometimes when I can't sleep in my normal bed, I find myself defaulting to the floor. When I wake up, I cry because I'm worried I'll always be like this. Parents have no idea how much they can mess up their kids. Ah yes, Dr. Phil. Responsible for a good amount of parental abuse, I'm pretty sure. This one time, I didn't want to finish drinking my milk, so my dad threw the cup across the room, shattering it and getting milk everywhere, while he proceeded to flip my chair over while I was still in it. He then crouched over my body saying, "You want to mess with me?" a bunch, and stormed out telling me to clean up the mess. And just lots more stuff like that. I once said whatever to my dad at a Bubba Gump's restaurant on vacation in Hawaii. He proceeded to scream at me and yelled at me to get out of the restaurant. I just sat there, mortified, and he left instead. I got grounded from an end of the year party when I was 11 for getting a B on a paper, even though I still got all A's. I was devastated. It was thrown by my best friend, and I was never allowed to do anything, and I'd been looking forward to it all year. I had the perfect dress to wear because my aunt's mother had taken me shopping and bought this cool dress that made me feel like Molly Ringwald. I had never been allowed to wear it before, and it had been in my closet since September. I was seriously having a Cinderella moment, although I honestly related more to Jane Eyre because I was adopted and a bookworm. The day of the party comes around and I'm bawling. I'm a good kid. I try to be perfect every waking moment. Now I'm grounded from my best friend's party. The mom of my best friend knows how tough it is at home. I'm screamed at, belittled, hit all the time. This party was a beacon. My friend's mom barges into my house, tells me to get ready and get my stuff together because I'll be spending the night. My mom protests. How about I call CPS about the 50 cats in your house? I end up going to the party and she teaches me to be a badass. I had all the usual punishments. No video games for a week, no TV for X nights, no pocket money this week, groundings, you name it, I probably had it at one point or another. One particular punishment tops the rest though for creativity and cruelty. One day I was at a friend's place with my parents and discovered that if we opened his bedroom window all the way, we could squeeze out of it and climb onto his roof. His bedroom was on the second floor of their house, and they lived on top of a hill. So if we had fallen, we would have fallen probably 7 to 8 meters and then tumbled another 20 to 30 to the bottom of the hill. Anyway, both sets of parents walk outside at one point and hear us talking from the roof. They flip their lids and call us back inside. We scramble back into his bedroom and are sitting there terrified when our parents storm in. We get called down into the kitchen and are told to sit down at the kitchen table and await our punishment. My friend's dad opens up the pantry and starts pulling things out to make a sandwich. Then it hits us like a ton of bricks. Our punishment is to eat a sandwich made of the most ill-complementing, grotesque food combinations that he had at his disposal. The final product ended up being an unholy blend of Vegemite, oysters, anchovies, cheese, creamed corn, raw beef mince, and hot English mustard. I actually don't recall what it tasted like, other than being awful. Looking back on it as an adult, I reckon it was just as much for their entertainment than our punishment. But damn if it wasn't creative. For me, it was always the wooden spoon. I got the wooden spoon until I was probably 15. Then, when my mom broke it over my backside because I wouldn't stop laughing, she moved to the metal one. Standing in the corner was another big one. My youngest sister got smart though and would get the corner where she could see the TV. So that was exchanged for flat walls on your knees, Malcolm in the Middle style. Another weird one I got was when my sister and I wouldn't stop fighting, my mom made us sit next to each other holding hands and not speaking for hours on end. I couldn't drink water from my bathroom. My bathroom genuinely had colder water, and the best water in the house. My mom got suspicious when I'd leave to my bathroom for a few seconds every few minutes. I don't know what she possibly thought I was doing with it, but no more bathroom water, and I had to drink lukewarm peasant water like the rest of my family. This one's pretty tame, but honestly just doesn't make sense. Who cares if that's the water they want to drink? I also agree, bathroom water, for whatever reason, tends to be better than kitchen water. I grew up the firstborn son of an officer in the Air Force in the Bible Belt. I was an extremely inquisitive child and mentioned anything weird I found that didn't make sense in the Bible, resulting in a beating either with a belt or a wooden spoon with my pants down. I wasn't allowed to play Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh or anything, as it was all satanic. So, of course now I play a boatload of Japanese card games and escapist video games, listen to obnoxious screaming noises, and have a healthy interest in European occultism. Go me, I guess. What's an experience you and a friend shared where you both silently agreed to never speak of it again? In grade school, a friend tried to make his pee hole bigger with an Allen key. I told him he shouldn't try, but he did anyway. There was a lot of blood, and it was pretty messed up. He just wrapped his bits in toilet paper, and nothing was said of the incident ever again. What the? Why would you even do that? I slept with a female friend of mine at her brother's birthday party. I ended up finishing all over a huge beanbag. After we got cleaned up and everything, we hung out. Her brother and his 11-year-old friends come running in and they start jumping on the beanbag that we forgot to clean. After jumping around for a bit, a lot of them started noticing wet spots on each other. We told them we spilled water and have not had a conversation about it to this day. I, female, semi-drunkenly hooked up with one of my guy friends, who I'd known for a long time. He has some really tiny equipment, maybe 2 to 3 inches erect. He was really nervous about it, but I didn't really mind since he was quite good at other stuff. The next morning, we were cuddling in bed and he begged me not to tell any of our friends about our hookup or his size. We're still good friends and his secret will always be safe with me. I went streaking with my male friend while very drunk. His big-boobed girlfriend decided to join in the nudity. I said she had some nice ones once they're revealed. My friend decides he doesn't like me ogling her jumblies and decides to fight me. Let the drunken nude wrestling begin. Back in middle school, a friend and I, both girls, used to sit on the couch in my basement and use one of those giant yoga balls to press into each other's crotches to get off. It felt great, and we would softly talk dirty to each other the whole time. This happened 2 or 3 times she came over. Haven't talked about it since. When I was nearing the end of my freshman year of college, a few friends of mine dropped acid one Sunday afternoon. The acid was apparently very strong, and all but one of them went off trip-a-dip-a-doodling on their merry way. The one I speak of got stuck in his own head and was found wandering through the halls, buck naked with a blank expression on his face. Oh, and I also forgot to mention, this was during family visit weekend. Anyways, after a couple of friends and I grab a towel and corral my fried friend into a dorm room, he proceeds to sit on a bed and stare out the window, still completely naked. Being the responsible person I am, I realize that he's so out of touch with reality to the point that he may accidentally hurt himself if left alone. So I tell the gathering crowd that I'll stay with him and they can go enjoy the beautiful Sunday Santa Cruz afternoon. I then grabbed the nearest smoking device and got incredibly stoned while I had to stare 4 hours at my naked friend on LSD while he worked his way out of his psychedelic pickle. Several people casually walked into the room, stared at my friend, stared at me, laughed, and then turned around and left during this time. A few hours into my marathon pot-laden babysitting venture, he looked over at me, stood up to put his pants on, and said, "That was really weird. We haven't mentioned it since." I walked in on my roommate and good friend taking care of himself. I saw everything. He'll occasionally try to jokingly bring it up when we're drunk or something, but I shut him down. Always. I'd rather just pretend it never happened. I, male, was probably 7 years old and at my male best friend's house playing Mario Kart, and we caught his mom giving my dad a BJ. Proceeded to act it out and get caught by them. They were peeved, but agreed to say nothing on the agreement we said nothing to our other parents. Didn't really help. Both marriages were crap. I'm sorry, what do you mean you proceeded to act it out? Never mind, I don't want to know. I, a straight male, had been drinking heavily with some friends all day and had recently returned from a nighttime skinny dip. I, being too drunk to get dressed, was just in a towel. We were all around the fire when I start to feel a bit sick. I end up accidentally dropping my towel and half crawling over to one of the girls, throwing up on her while halfway across. Apparently, every time I would heave, I would thrust a bit, so my bits were slapping her in the face. I woke up naked, spooning another friend's boyfriend in their tent with no recollection of the night's events. This would count, except they all seemed to never shut up about it. I mean, if I woke up in that situation, I definitely have some questions. So yes, please talk to me about it. What the heck happened? A buddy of mine was driving with me as a passenger. We went down the road near his house along the lake when he says, "Check her out. A woman in a bikini is going down for a swim. What a butt." He slowed down so I could roll down the window and do a catcall. We were stupid 17-year-olds. I was leaning out the window yelling, "Woo, baby, nice butt." She turned around and it was his mom. Nothing too crazy, but my best friend has never kissed a guy and she was afraid she would mess it up, so she begged me to teach her first. I'm a girl, by the way. I agreed, and I knew she was nervous, so we had a few glasses of wine first and then we tried to practice. I lean in to kiss her and she giggles, which makes me laugh. After several unsuccessful tries, we actually managed lip contact for about half a minute. I was really proud of her because I knew she was nervous. She suddenly bursts into tears and gets snot all over me, and cries about being a bad friend asking me to do this. I probably shouldn't have given her so much to drink in hindsight. We never speak of it only because we know we'll just laugh too much and she's mortified. On a college trip abroad, my best friend and I head up to our hotel room. We get asked by one of our tutors to get our other tutor from his room. We knock on the door and realize it's ajar. We sheepishly head inside quietly and spot a big bag of white powder on the bed with lines on the sideboard. Glance at each other, shake our heads, walk out and get pizza. I was at my friend's house at around the age of 13. We're making tea and I open the cupboard for a mug. Inside is a Tupperware box with a large square tinfoil packet, around the size of a 5-kilo bag of sugar, and a bunch of little bags of brown powder. I take the cups out and close the cupboard and don't say a word. 10 years on and we've still never discussed it, and I don't think I've talked about it with anyone else either. Interestingly, his dad's a great guy and has been a very hands-on father despite divorcing my friend's mom. My best friend's husband hit on me a month before the wedding. We had all been drinking that night. He was wasted, and I was slightly tipsy but fully aware. I told him off and told him if I ever found out he tried that with another girl, I'd rip his appendage off. I was maid of honor at the wedding and I never told her. I thought about it, but they had already bought a house together. The wedding was set and she was just so happy. I put it out of my mind and pretended it never happened, and I'm glad I did. They were married for 5 years before she got brain cancer and died, leaving behind a daughter. He was the most doting husband during the 7 months she wasted away and is a truly amazing father. He's remarried now and the most loyal man I've ever met. If I had taken his one idiot move as the basis for his life, I could quite possibly have ruined a lot for him and her. I was unsure if I was doing the right thing at the time, but now I know it was definitely the best thing to do. Wow, that one really took a turn I was not expecting. Goes to show you though, sometimes good people just make mistakes. I had a drunken 5-way with my roommate, his girlfriend, and another couple. 3 guys, 2 girls. We all ended up blacking out and only had vague memories of strip poker and awkwardness in the morning. Until we found the video. We all decided to delete the video and never talk about it ever again. The next month was very quiet. In 7th grade, my best friend and I were playing basketball at the park. I had to poo so bad, but the closest toilet was across the street. So I stopped and pulled my shorts away from my body and let the poop fall without touching my shorts. We walked away casually and no one saw. Ew, come on, man. Just hold it till you get there. A few years ago, I was at a party and had gone with a longtime female friend. All was well at first, but as the night went on, we both had a bit too much to drink. Her boyfriend of over 2 years had suddenly dumped her by text, and I had just found out my girlfriend had cheated on me. I say this because we were both dancing and both buzzed and emotionally unstable. As a joke, she grinds into me, laughing as she does it, but I start getting aroused and grind back. I suddenly realize what I'm doing and back off. But her face is red and she's visibly aroused. She pulls me into the bathroom and we proceed to get to business. Not super hot, lustful animal stuff, but we both enjoyed it and make out for a few minutes, then we both duck out, using the excuse I had to hold her hair as she puked. The hostess, a mutual friend, offered us to stay the night, which we took her up on. She passed out and I was having a heart attack. We were buzzed. What if she freaks out? Did I just ruin a 7-year-long close friendship just to feel good and make our exes angry? A million things ran through my mind, and I eventually nodded off. I woke up an hour later with her sprawled on me, which is fine. We've shared a bed more than a few times. She wakes up and blinks, looks at me and goes, "What the hell? Buy me dinner first next time, dork." She ends it with a laugh, but my face must have been ghost white. She hugs me and says, "2 consenting adults had fun. Plus, hey, better someone I know and trust rather than some weird jerk who might have tried something weird. We're still friends, okay? If you need to be alone, I understand." I hug her back and ask her if she's up for some IHOP. All is well and we're still best of friends and hang out regularly. That was about 2 years ago, and we both haven't said a word about it. We traded drunken, confusing oral at the tender age of 16. He initiated it, but I didn't need much persuading. Felt great at the time, but 10 minutes later started a spiral of self-doubt and confusion that lasted about a year. Worked it out in the end. He went on to marry a woman. I'm in a civil partnership with a man. We never mentioned it after that night, and given I moved away a few years later, plus, his lady wife, it's unlikely to ever be spoken of again, except here, now. When I was about 4 years old or so, I had a best friend whose name shall not be disclosed. We'll call him Tom. Tom and I lived in the same neighborhood, so we had plenty of opportunities to stay over at each other's houses while our mothers jibber-jabbed in the next room. When we were at my house, we played in the basement, which was outfitted as a playroom, with trains and Legos and all sorts of fun things, like markers. So he and I are downstairs in the playroom and he decides that he's done with the trains, so he picks up an orange marker. We didn't have any paper, so he finds this felt dartboard and colors on the white cardboard backing. I want to get along with him, so I do the same, choosing a green marker. Well, he soon gets bored with this as well, but he thinks the colors would look cooler if the lights were out. So he waddles up to the light switch, climbs on top of the toy chest, and turns off the lights. The colors do indeed look cooler. Of course, coloring is only so much fun when one is full of chocolate milk. So we both get up and walk over to where we tossed our socks earlier. I don't remember why we took off our socks, but it must have been something they said because we immediately peed all over them. Our socks were soon thoroughly soaked with our urine. This gave Tom an idea. He looked down at his mini member and thought to himself, "Know what would look really cool if it were orange?" At least, I assume that's what he was thinking, because he then started coloring his bits orange. Maybe he just wanted a better tan. And of course, Tom is absolutely right. It does look cooler. But you know what's cooler than orange? Green. Green is much cooler than orange. So I proceed to color my own willy green. Cue our Catholic mothers. Tom's mother is absolutely horrified. At least, that's what my own mother tells me. To be honest, I don't remember much after coloring the felt dartboard. My own mother, thankfully I guess, took a much more humorous approach. She thought it was hysterical. Anyway, they took us upstairs to the bathroom and made us wash our little dongs in the bathtub, while my mother washed and dried our socks. After that, Tom and his mom went home. I've never heard anything about that incident from anybody aside from my mother, and vague memories are my only assurance that the story is true. In any case, neither Tom nor I have ever spoken of it, nor will I ever, except to my fiance, because if I don't, my mother will. Come on, Ma, be cool around the fiance. When I was 15, my friend Gerald was staying over for the weekend. It was the typical Friday night. We were up playing video games on my N64, hanging out, and watching random horror movies at a low volume with the dialogue replaced with our own snarky narration while he browsed the net on my computer. This would be rude ordinarily, but he didn't have a computer or the internet at his home, and it was an opportunity for him to get some exposure to both. We were playing Gauntlet Legends when he paused the game and looked at me. "Dude, your arm's bleeding." "Oh, I must have gotten myself on a tree while I was dirt biking. It's nothing. I'm fine. Now let's kill some dwarves." We started up again, but I could see him looking at my arm every few minutes out of the corner of my eye. He paused the game again and dropped the controller between his knees. "So if you don't tell me what's actually wrong, I'm waking up your mom." "I'm fine." "Dude, cut it out. When you got up to grab a drink, your sleeve pulled up and I saw him." I sat there for a bit, closed my eyes and sighed. He knew, so there was no point in hiding it or keeping up the charade. He lifted my sleeve as I sat there and hung my head quietly, then backed away in hushed silence. When I looked up to make eye contact, his eyes were rimmed with tears. "Why would you do that to yourself, man? Those aren't clean lines. You carved them with something. It's complicated." "Then uncomplicate it for me." So I told him the truth. I was deeply depressed. My family was disintegrating, and it was the only way to get that kind of bottled emotional pain out of my system. I was halfway through explaining myself when he wrapped his arms around me and hugged the breath out of me. "I love you, original poster. Not in a gay way. You're my best friend and you're like a brother to me. I'm there for you, man. Just don't do this again, alright? I won't tell anyone, but you'd better promise me that you'll call me the next time it gets that bad." The rest of the night was understandably strained. No matter how we tried to forget it all, the elephant was still in the room. We never spoke about it again. He did his best to pretend nothing had happened the next day and would flat out not acknowledge my wounds. Okay, to anyone that's going through anything like this, there's always someone that wants to hear from you. Even if you don't feel like you have a close friend, there are numbers that you can call and people that you can talk to. Please, take care of yourself and love yourself. Kindly, a random stranger on the internet. 6th grade, outdoor school. Him and I ate a lot of pudding. A load of pudding. That night, we both book it to the bathroom, almost pooping our pants. We get to the toilets and just let it rip, and holy crap did we crap. We're sitting in adjacent stalls and we're just laughing our butts off at the sound of each other's poop. Think like fire hoses. Good stuff. We decided to never speak about that again, but really it's not that bad. Pretty funny. Me and my friend were both maybe 8 or 9, and we were watching adult content in his basement. He says, "This might seem weird, but when I watch this or see a hot girl, my thing gets real hard and bigger." I say, having knowledge of this for some reason, "It gets hard so it will fit into the girl's stuff. A soft one would probably just mush to the side." I pretty much gave my friend the talk because his dad never did, or never got the chance, because he died when we were 12. In high school, a friend had a party at his place. I had pre-gamed and drank a bit too much too fast and spent a majority of the party laying on the couch with my head spinning. As the party died down a bit, a good female friend, I'm male, came over and started rubbing my head and shoulders and asking if I felt okay. The party host announced he was going downstairs with his girlfriend and not to come down there unless you wanted to join. I looked up at my friend and asked if she wanted to go downstairs on a silly whim. She agreed, which caught me completely by surprise. I had no idea how much she had to drink either, but alas, we went down to the basement as well. I don't even know what I was expecting. When we got there, my friend's bedroom door was closed and locked, and he promptly told us to go away. Her and I went over to his couch and sat down together. I don't even know how it started. We just started making out. Nothing serious, just some hand stuff. We went to the bathroom, cleaned up, and literally never spoke a word about it, ever again. So I'm part of this 3-man best friend group thing. We'll call these 2 best friends D and M. They're both like brothers to me, and we've known each other for around a decade. We're all in our early 20s. The kind of friendship where we can and do talk about anything without discomfort. We cannot be uncomfortable around each other anymore. One of our random guy talks goes in the direction of sexuality one day, and I mention the idea that I'm probably bi. There's a point that's made relating back to the fact that we have this 3-way bromance going on where we joke about being lovers and stuff. And there was a tongue-in-cheek joke rumor that I was secretly dating D in high school. So it's funny that I'm not straight. Funny. One day, I'm hanging out with D and just chatting. Topic of sex stuff comes up. He asks me about my bi-ness. Asks if I've ever thought about him or M in that way. Oh man, I know you're just curious, but come on. This isn't gonna end well. I go for honesty and openness and he responds in kind, because we're the kind of guys that can speak honestly without awkwardness. No need to dress things up. So we talk frankly about the theoretical idea of the 2 of us as a romantic couple, on the assumption that speaking about it seriously doesn't mean we're serious about it. We get stuck on this topic and somehow come to the conclusion that we wouldn't make a bad couple. Too bad he isn't into guys, right? Long story short, it ends up being a long night. And the more he thinks about it, the more he doesn't see such a problem with the idea. I knew we were tight, but this is something else. He's similarly surprised by how much the idea doesn't faze him, and within a couple hours, our tone moves from neutral comments stemming from simple curiosity to a pretty serious discussion that sounds like he might try to take it somewhere. I don't know what happened, seriously, but suddenly it's like 1 a.m. in the morning and he straight up asks me out, completely serious. As far as I know, the dude's completely straight, and I've been best friends with him for half my life. Suddenly, he's telling me he thinks he loves me, and it feels so natural to say that, and why didn't he say it sooner? And I'm sorry, man, but I don't see you in that way. Emotional intimacy is one thing, and we got that going for us. You're a cool guy, really, but I can't accept this. I just can't see you in that way at this point. I can't. It's never been brought up again. Would movie had a happy ending until you consider what had to happen next. At the end of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, you just know that Cameron is going to get his butt whooped by his dad. Braveheart. I mean, the movie is historically inaccurate, but it ends at the Battle of Bannockburn, where the narrator says they won their freedom, but that freedom only lasted like 5 years before war broke out again. Breakfast Club. Bender most likely went home and got beaten by his dad again after the movie ended. The Truman Show. This guy has no idea what the real world is like and he's just thrown into it. Most people have 18 years of preparation. If we're being honest here, he probably sued the crap out of them, so I'm sure Truman was living in luxury afterwards. Lawyers would be jumping to take this case. The Day After Tomorrow. It isn't hugs and giggles. Things do not go back to normal. The human race got slapped hard. Much of the upper hemisphere is covered in ice. Let's not mince words. A few billion people died. Whole nations were wiped off the map. Yes, you have survivors, but now this problem. Food. A huge section of the world's agriculture was taken away. How are you going to feed the remaining masses? This doesn't include shelter. Those lucky ones who are on the edge of the frost are going to move further down, South America and Africa. While true, the ice will melt eventually, this massive snow front will have a huge effect on global climates. Everything will be colder, sunlight being reflected off the surface rather than absorbed. The survivors will have such terrible hardships ahead. It will take a generation or more to bounce back. We're not even talking about political turmoil. Warlords, tyrants, and dictators will rise to power. Wars over limited resources. The movie ends with our gang getting picked up by what remains of the US government. The future is so uncertain. Many more will perish from harsh weather, starvation, sickness, and/or hostilities. We don't just hold hands and sing Kumbaya. The human race will suffer with huge blood losses to come. I think I kind of want to see this sequel now. The Day After Tomorrow. WALL-E. It would still take decades before the people were actually able to live off the earth, and their quality of life would still be awful compared to their lives in the ship. Monsters Inc. There's a reason they made a prequel and not a sequel. Laughter being 10 times more powerful means a lot of factory monsters would have lost their jobs, even accounting for the energy crisis. Rent. Mimi has AIDS. She'll definitely be dead soon. Roger and Collins have HIV in the 80s. They'll probably be dead soon. Mark is all alone and is gonna watch his best friends die. Joanne and Maureen might get a happy ending though. Yeah, the characters in Rent get it pretty rough. The Sound of Music. The nuns were almost definitely executed by the Nazis as soon as it became apparent they helped the family escape. Almost any horror movie where one character makes it through the entire movie and is the last man standing, actually usually a female, covered in blood and surrounded by dead bodies. What happens when the police arrive? Yeah, I can't say that looks good. Whiplash. Outwardly, it seems like a happy ending. Andrew proves Fletcher wrong and showcases his abilities as a musician. However, that's exactly what Fletcher wanted, and proved that his abusive teaching style works. All Fletcher wanted was his Charlie Parker. That's why he was so angry when his former student died. He thought he was going to fill that role. When Andrew begins his solo, at first Fletcher is clearly mad and confused. But as Andrew continues, Fletcher guides him, and the movie ends with them sharing eye contact before finishing the song. With this, Andrew becomes his Charlie Parker, something Fletcher can put on a pedestal and say, I created that talent. You also have to consider what happens to Andrew after this. He goes right back into the abuse he suffered from under Fletcher, and loses all the love and enjoyment that he has for jazz music. In my opinion, I see Andrew having a similar fate with either the real Charlie Parker, a heroin addict who died of overdose at 34, or Fletcher's former student who took their own life. Zootopia. The whole plot of the movie hinges on reshaping the natural order by all living in unity. That's great. Right until you realize that herbivores are still super good at reproducing to make up for carnivores, as shown by the rabbit population sign counter going up at a ridiculous rate gag. Except nobody's eating them anymore. By the end of the movie, it's also revealed that there's herbivore extremists which want to take it further and get rid of carnivores. Overpopulation and possibly genocide is on its way. Kate and Leopold. Kate finds out that she can't vote or own property anymore now that she's living in the past. Also, she has to live with the knowledge that she porked her own grandson. The Avengers. Everyone's sitting around having coffee and they're still pulling bodies out of the rubble. Back to the Future. Marty is now essentially living with a family of strangers. It's not going to take them long to realize he has no knowledge of any conversation they've ever had or anything they've ever done together. Also, let's just keep that guy who tried to assault your mom around so we can wash our car. And why does our son seem to look exactly like that guy from high school? Finding Nemo. How do the fish get out of those plastic bags? They're probably dead. One of them even says, "Now what?" Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. It seems as though they were meant for each other because even with no memory of each other, they still find each other and fall in love. As the movie foreshadows with repeating or glitching the last shot of the film, they're doomed to a cycle of meeting, falling in love, breaking up, heartbreak, erasing their memories about each other, and repeat. This one is heavily implied by the movie, but yes, you do need to kind of play past the movie in your head to really get the full impact of the ending. Get Out. This whole white family is murdered and the only survivor is a blood-soaked black guy in the uppity suburbs. Seriously, good movie. One of the best I've seen in years. But I left the theater and the first thing I said to my husband was, that investigation is not going to go well for him. Donnie Darko. Clearly, there are multiple people in that universe who have succumbed to an unfortunate fate they have no control over in order to save the world. The Road to El Dorado. There's a decent chance that Miguel and Tulio carried germs to the city that the natives have no immunity against. And there's an extremely high chance that Shell will pick something up if they take her back to Europe, or to any of the other colonies. The Never-Ending Story. Read the title. It's gonna come back around again, and worse, on an infinite loop, long after you switched that VHS tape out and went to bed. That gut-wrenching scene with the horse near the start, doomed to repeat. Beauty and the Beast. They had to start their life together without any furniture in that entire castle. Not having any furniture isn't that big of a deal. Considering all the servants were turned into furniture, I think the West Wing being full of shredded corpses is a bigger problem. Dirty Dancing. It ends on a happy note, but we all know they're not able to be together after the family leaves. My girlfriend in high school loved that movie, and every time she made me watch it, at the very end I always said, and they never saw each other again. The one that annoys me the most, even if I really enjoyed the movie, is Kingsman. The villain succeeded. Imagine living in a world where electronics can cause rage-inducing feelings. People would be abandoning technology in a world that isn't prepared for that. I mean, sure, people can romanticize living in the Wild West or hunter-gatherer, but there's a reason why people weren't considered adults until 13-ish. They didn't know how to succeed in that life until 10 years or so of training. Now you're dumping the entire Western technocrat society into such a state. They can't survive. On top of this, if Sam Jackson's penetration into various world leaders is as ubiquitous as it seemed, that also means that there was no one left to take command of the chaos. He didn't target just politicians, but performers and celebrities too. With people jokingly saying how The Rock should run for office and how people praise Schwarzenegger's reign as congressman, it's obvious that charismatic celebrities can use that to obtain positions of power. Except they're all dead. Anybody who lived on the East Coast from the Great Blackout back in 2003 would remember how tense things were after a few days. Now, instead, there's no one figuring out how to turn the lights back on. Plus, there isn't a few days of grace before people get violent. The violence has already happened. So, to set the stage, you have a population that just began attacking each other from technology. When they stop and look around, some old rivalries might have been reignited. On top of this, people are going to drop technology and live a life they're not prepared for. There will be no leadership or voice due to their eradication, which means that people are going to have to determine who's a leader. That is rarely peaceful. I know that there's a Kingsman too, but let's be honest, this is probably how things would have played out. Michael Banks from Mary Poppins is exactly the right age to grow up and be killed in the First World War. Passengers. Even if you ignore the Stockholm-driven relationship, the couple spent decades filling the spaceship with plants. Plants. As the roots of those trees grow, there's a massive risk of them rupturing vital supply lines. Or even worse, making a hole that leads out into the vacuum of space. Plant roots will push through concrete. That spaceship is beyond screwed. If humidity in the air was increased, there's also a huge amount of rusting that could happen. And that's ignoring that the couple spent decades eating the food supplies. The food supplies were supposed to be enough for a few thousand people for a few months. 2 people eating into that for decades, plus everything that got wasted during the film, means that inventory is massively depleted. Basically, if you woke up on that ship, there's a really good chance you'd die, either of starvation or the ship degrading because of all that plant life. The 2 main characters put 5,000 lives in serious jeopardy. Frozen. Number 1, the queen very likely can't sleep with her husband without killing him. Therefore, she can't breed. And even if she can, who knows what kind of mutant baby she'd spawn. Number 2, Anna can't marry Kristoff if the traditions of royalty in that country follow the vast majority of royalty traditions I've ever heard of. And number 3, the country was frozen over for at least a week or 2 with thick snow in the middle of growing season. Those people are gonna starve to death. I won't lie, I never thought about the food situation in Frozen. You're probably right there. War games. I've always been curious what happens to Lightman after the WOPR decides that the only winning move is not to play. He obviously had such a big role in helping to avert nuclear war that they had to let him go. But how do you release a 17-year-old back into the world after seeing all of that top secret stuff? My personal headcanon? McKittrick releases David with no charges, telling him in so many words, "Thanks for your help, don't hack anymore, but go study computer science at university. You might have a promising career ahead of you." Django Unchained. Sure, he's an amazing gunslinger at the end of the film, but he's in the South, pre-Civil War. He just killed a prominent plantation owner and everyone on the plantation. Just the sight of an African American on a horse stopped people in their tracks, and that was with Schultz claiming to be somewhat of a master. But now it's just him and his wife. I'd like to add, I love this movie, but if you think about it, after what happened in Django, I can't see him lasting long. Trainspotting. Even though Mark is totally supposed to be an anti-hero, you find yourself rooting for him throughout the film. After he screws the other guys over and is literally running away from all his problems, declaring that he's going to change his life for the better, you think just for a second that he was being honest, until you realize that he's a heroin addict with a duffel bag full of cash. Logan. Even though the kids get away, Laura will eventually be like her dad, the Wolverine, with her body and healing factor weakening as she gets older due to the adamantium in her. Cue a whole bunch of arguments in the comments under this post right now. Risky Business kind of sets Tom Cruise's character up for terrible decisions because he gets away with everything. Alien Resurrection. The size of that explosion as the spaceship hits Earth indicates major atmospheric turmoil, dust being whirled up, etc., akin to a nuclear winter. Goodbye crops worldwide. The Graduate. I thought it was a happy ending until my history teacher explained what their expressions on the bus at the end meant. Those two are basically screwed. No job, no car, no money, no family. Jurassic World. Frustrated me that the main characters literally walked off into the sunset. No, don't turn this into a happy ending. Hundreds of people died. And can you imagine the lawsuit that's gonna happen? My personal opinion, none of the Jurassic Park movies are worth watching after the first one. In Kill Bill, Beatrix kills him, but probably has a ton of assassins who are constantly trying to kill her now. And now she has a daughter. Things will just get more complicated. For this one, there's also the much-loved fan theory that the little girl from the first one will come back and try to kill Beatrix eventually. I kind of like that idea for a sequel, if they ever decide to do one. Elysium. Nice. Make people live longer in an already dangerously overpopulated world. Can't wait for the food shortages, power shortages, water shortages, and so on. Yeah, I don't know if they really thought that one through. Transcendence. Will uploads the virus to save Max. This instantly bricks the world's computers and deletes the internet. There's definitely going to be major implications because of this. Ghost. Patrick Swayze happily goes off to ghost heaven, having just sentenced Demi Moore to a life of solitude and celibacy because she knows he's waiting for her. Gravity. For a start, she's stuck miles from anywhere, weak, no map, shoes, food, or drinkable water. And even if the capsule is sending out an alert, there's no reason to assume it would be picked up, as there's no satellites to get the signal. Plus, the Chinese, whose Soyuz it was, would probably assume it was empty, because for some reason there was nobody on their space station. A lot of Ewoks died due to the raining debris from a recently obliterated Death Star shortly after the end of Return of the Jedi. It seemed like Jesse got a happy ending at the end of Breaking Bad, until you think about how his fingerprints are definitely all over that meth lab. Did Jesse get a happy ending? I don't know, dude had it pretty rough. The Island. You just released a couple thousand burdens to the state, crippled an enormous company, destabilized the economy, and put thousands of people out of work. Not to mention the unfathomable legal complications of having a couple thousand clones running around. Whenever I watch this movie, I definitely have that same thought, that there's definitely gonna be some problems now that a bunch of rich and famous people's clones are running around the world. Harry Potter. Okay, so Voldy's dead, but now you have a world which is split down the middle and in a huge mess. People died over the year and in the Battle of Hogwarts. The Ministry would be so ruined from the year of management, and employees would be turning on one another. The wizarding world of Britain would need to rebuild from the ground up. Everything and everyone will be seeking recompense, and Harry would have a horrid time of it. He's the savior, and people will want to meet him, to thank him, to sob sad stories, and the families of the Death Eaters will either want to kill him or try to ask him to help their family members. Yeah, it would definitely be a bumpy road for the Ministry of Magic for quite a while after all the events that took place. Case 39. The monster is dead, but Emily's life is ruined. Her friends are dead. All potential witnesses are dead. Her friends and colleagues are gonna sue the pants off her and put her in jail because she killed an innocent girl who had already been through so much. Her career is as dead as the monster. There's nothing she can do to convince the society at large now, even though she saved them all. American Beauty always unsettled me because Kevin Spacey finally finds peace, but his daughter and her boyfriend next door are going to prison for his murder. Hitch. The dude lost his entire business and everyone is questioning their relationships. I'm not sure what he's gonna do with no work. The girl is a reporter who almost lost her job. I don't think she can take over payments for his place. Hey, Hitch is a pretty smooth guy. I'm sure he'll find some work somewhere. The Matrix Revolutions. The Oracle admits that the peace brought with Neo's sacrifice is only temporary. It was a crappy ending to begin with, though. Deep Impact. There's no way the world was peaceful, despite that rousing speech from Morgan Freeman. The Golden Compass. In the movie, the characters look into the blazing sunset while the music swells. In the book, a boy is ripped apart under the cover of darkness, perhaps 12 hours or less later. Ponyo. The world is really messed up by the events of the movie. Ponyo gets to be human and to be with her love, but the world is put back to the Dark Ages, with most of it underwater and prehistoric sea life roaming the waters. All farming is destroyed, no satellites, industry drowned. When the petrol available is consumed, what then? Hairspray. The main characters get together, but Tracy was still wanted by the police for assault and evading arrest. She was definitely caught when the cameras turned off. Training Day. There's no way the three wise men and Alonzo's crew would have let Jake live after what he's seen. Drop Dead Fred. The imaginary friends are sent to children to overcome problems in their lives. Fred is sent to Mickey's daughter. What are her problems? And how come Mickey didn't recognize the name Drop Dead Fred, even though he remembered it from childhood earlier on? Independence Day. Can you imagine cleaning up after every major city in the world has been destroyed? Sure, the aliens are gone, but you still have to clean up 1 billion bodies and spend $1 gazillion trying to fix things. Groundhog Day. The guy has spent years living an essentially consequence-free existence. The switch to Iron Man mode is going to be jarring and probably fatal for him and or people around him. Forrest Gump. When you realize that Forrest is left alone with Forrest Jr. to take care of, and that both of them are going to be coping with AIDS in a time that the disease was completely maligned. The Pursuit of Happiness. Everyone is all happy that Will Smith gets the job, but they all seem to forget it's just an internship, an unpaid internship. He's still broke. He's still homeless. A few weeks of no showers, bad sleep, and no food, and he'll be fired and back in the same position he was. Death proof. All the women would be arrested, convicted, and imprisoned for that car chase where they hit other cars that ended with them beating a man to death when he was lying on the ground helpless. Stepbrothers. The guys start to grow up and turn into exactly what they despised before, adult wage slaves. Running the karaoke business starts to get boring, so Brennan turns to drugs. As a result, his psychiatrist girlfriend leaves him, and he falls further into the throes of addiction. Dale is devastated when his father, Robert, passes away. The hijinks are over, and reality sets in for the brothers. They eventually fall out of touch with each other. Chris Kardashian continues to cyberbully them to their respective graves. Wow, you really brought a dark twist to a comedy movie there. Lawyers of Reddit, what was the least defendable case ever brought to you? Probably my client charged with statutory assault, multiple accounts, who impregnated his high school sweetheart's daughter after sleeping with said daughter from the ages of 13 to 15. He was 35 at the time of the birth. DNA in the form of a baby is strong evidence for the state. I had a client who won just shy of a 7-figure settlement in a personal injury case. She then dropped into my office to ask me to file a fee dispute against the attorney who represented her in the personal injury action. That attorney took a little over $260,000 on this case. If you're doing the math at home, this guy took a 27% fee on the type of case where 40% fees are common. Did a fantastic job because the woman got nearly $1 million, and then she turned around and tried to sue him to recover any of his fees. I rejected the case out of hand and then got an ethics complaint for discriminating against her. It kinda sounds like this lady just needs to take the win. She's being really greedy here. A woman wanted me to sue her previous lawyer for charging her a lot of money but producing almost no work to justify his fees. She gave me what she told me was the lawyer's total work product, a page printed off the internet for which she said she was charged thousands of dollars for legal advice. She had already brought a claim via my jurisdiction's disciplinary body for lawyers. She had lost and wanted to bring an appeal. The judgment kept referring to documents that I hadn't seen. I pushed her to give me everything, and she came in with multiple files full of immaculate legal work that totally justified the fees she was fighting. We told her to get lost, but she wasted a lot of my time before we realized she was full of it. So this guy ordered a pizza, and nowhere was it specified that the delivery was supposed to be done in under 30 minutes, but the guy assumed it because movies. The delivery arrived 1 hour later, and it wasn't even necessary to apologize. They brought him his order and an additional beef pizza. The guy wanted our firm to sue them because he's Hindu, doesn't eat beef, and apparently felt offended. You're really fishing for a lawsuit. Sounds like someone's just looking for some easy money. A friend of mine was in a case where a guy was accused of graffiti vandalism, among other things, and the conversation with the judge went like this. Sir, did you make this graffiti? No, I did not, but it has your signature at the end. Yeah, an artist has to sign his work. Case closed. Some people really need to learn to just keep their mouths shut. I worked in-house for a famous character company with a large fan base. A few crazies a year would call in. A guy called in claiming that we stole characters that he created and demanded to be compensated. I calmly asked them to provide more details so that I can determine whether this has any merit to it. He states he designed the characters himself and gave it to the well-known actual creator when he was a kid, and the creator pawned them off as his own. I asked him when he was born, and it's a good 20 years after these characters were actually created. I ask him to explain this, and he pivots and says he also created some other well-known famous characters and brands. Characters and brands that are not owned by my company. I kindly ask that if he wants to pursue anything to send us something in writing, and hang up. I figured if he wasn't going to do some really basic research on his own claim, he wasn't going to spend any time to write it up. Never heard from him again. My dad had a client who went on trial for being a felon in possession of firearms, possession of stolen property, burglary, and distribution of narcotics. The guy had multiple pictures of himself on Facebook holding guns, drugs, and cash, and had videos of himself both breaking into someone's house and stealing a gun, as well as selling hard drugs on several occasions. Despite my dad basically telling this genius he was going to prison either way and to plead for a reduced sentence, the dude still pled not guilty. We occasionally joke that the guy clearly wasn't competent to stand trial by virtue of being so dumb. Not my client, but my dad and the hospital he worked at was sued by a gentleman after he saved his wife's life. Here's the situation. Patient is pregnant with 8th child and miscarries. The fetus is removed, but the patient starts bleeding uncontrollably. The only option available is a hysterectomy. It was either that or she dies right there on the table. My dad gets called in to do the surgery, performs it successfully, and everyone's happy. Except it turns out the patient's husband is quite devout and beyond peeved that his wife can't have kids anymore. So he sued the hospital. No firm would represent him, and he ended up bringing proceedings himself. Went all the way to trial, and he lost hard. Yeah, that's an incredibly hard argument to make in court. There was no other option for your wife to live. Either way, she wasn't going to be giving you any more kids. It sounds like the husband is only upset because in his mind, he's now stuck with a wife who can't bear children. Instead of if she had passed away, he could have remarried. The whole situation is just gross. The client lived on a large riverfront block. She had a jetty for a boat. Her large tree fell over in a storm and landed mostly in the water, making it difficult to moor her boat. She wanted us to sue the government for not taking away her fallen tree. That tree's your personal property. You have to deal with it. It's not the government's. I represented a tree trimming company that went to the wrong address and cut down all the mature trees in that yard. The right address was 100 North X Street. The company went to 100 South X Street and just went straight at it, hacking away. I still have no idea why the insurance company didn't just settle that pre-suit. Not a lawyer, but I was a jailer, and I used to pull double duty as a bailiff. A guy stole a pickup truck and was later captured passed out behind the wheel, parked on a sidewalk surrounded by a ludicrous amount of drugs and guns. He had elected to represent himself because he wasn't done being stupid. His legal defense? Double jeopardy. You can't charge me for theft, drugs, and felon in possession of a weapon because I've already been convicted of all those charges before. In short, during his jury trial, he admitted to doing it, but explained with a smug grin that since he had already done time for the same charges from another case before that, he couldn't be prosecuted for them ever again. This is not how double jeopardy works, folks. He's in prison now for 20 years. If he'd taken legal counsel, he easily could have cut a deal for 5. Surely this guy understands the flaws in his own logic, right? Like, come on, you're gonna go to court with that? A dad in his 60s hadn't been paying child support for decades, and he owed more than $60K for 2 kids who were now adults. He was basically living at a farm in the middle of nowhere, so no one could find him. He worked for cash, so the money couldn't be garnished from anywhere. He then came into an inheritance which was deposited into his bank account and promptly confiscated by family maintenance. He wanted it back, apparently. The dude's just upset that he finally had to pay something. A lady was sacked by a large company. They had caught her embezzling money to fund a gambling habit. They had clear evidence the embezzling had occurred, and she didn't deny it. She sued the company for $300,000 for unfair dismissal. My sister's firm represented the company against this woman. The case was so easy, the firm gave it to my sister as her first ever solo attempt. My sister screwed it up, badly. Not only did she lose, the court awarded the woman $500,000 instead of the $300,000 she asked for. In the end, it was a good career move. The partners all knew her name and dropped into her office one by one to offer their sympathy. I would have loved to hear some more details on exactly how this went so bad. Worked in family law in California for like 2 years before deciding I'd hang myself if I didn't change career paths. In California, the obligation to pay spousal support or alimony ends when the recipient begins cohabitation with a new romantic partner. A guy who was positively getting ripped in half in his monthly payments came to my office and said he was aware of the rule about cohabitation and wanted to argue his point in court. You see, his ex was a narcissist. She was in love with and had begun cohabitation with herself. Her presence in her apartment should count the same as if it were a romantic partner there. He was bordering on begging me to take his money. I refused. Buddy, the lawyer's trying to do you a favor and save you some money. Just listen to him. My brother's a lawyer. His client took a backhoe, dug up a standalone ATM, and scooped it onto a flatbed truck. Then, and only then, noticed a security camera nearby filming everything. He got some black spray paint out of his truck, went up 2 inches away, really nice view of his face, and sprayed the camera lens. He insisted on pleading not guilty. I read a patent and told my bosses it was both invalid and infringed by no one. It had 10 means for elements in each patent claim that no one would practice, or that weren't supported in the written description. The partners, my bosses, new to patent litigation, sued on the patent anyway, using young, inexperienced, unseasoned attorneys in the firm. 3 years later, after billing the client millions of dollars, every defendant won by proving each claim either not infringed or invalid. Then, my employer appealed and billed the client another buttload of money, with a young attorney in charge of the appeal that didn't understand the underlying issues on any level, because he was a former teacher instead of a patent attorney. It was such a bad patent, no one would settle at any point in the case. My bosses were blood-sucking trolls. I quit for these and similar parallel reasons. The firm finally imploded. I'm a paralegal. Local guy in his 20s decides to go rob his dealer. He got the wrong apartment. When a college girl opened the door, he shot her and fled. She laid there for hours just out of reach of her cell phone and listened to it ring while her mom called. She lived. A neighbor found her. Now she's paralyzed from the neck down and her face is very deformed. This is a small town. During the trial, the jury was shown just how strung out on drugs he was, and how he even bragged to a few friends that he shot someone. That's pretty hard to defend. He got 40-something years. The girl that drove him to and from the apartment was also given jail time. This one's just sad to hear, that someone innocent was hurt for no real reason. I had a guy who wanted me to sue the city because the city took too long to bust his neighbor's illegal garbage disposal business. The guy claimed his neighbor's house had mice because of the garbage truck that was parked there when it wasn't hauling garbage. He said the neighbor's mice were causing his house to have mice, reducing the value of his house so he couldn't sell it. I asked him how long he'd been trying to sell his house. He said he wasn't trying to sell it yet. I asked him what he had done about the mice so far. He said he tried to call the city to have them get rid of the mice, but the city refused. I asked when he reported the neighbor's illegal garbage disposal business. He told me he never reported it. The city just towed the garbage truck after the neighbor was arrested for some unrelated crime, a DUI. I asked the guy how he knew all this, and he said the neighbor and him were partners in the illegal garbage disposal business, and his neighbor's old lady told him about the arrest in the towed garbage truck. Like, dude, what do you want me to do in this situation? If you take this to court, you're just gonna go to jail too. Are you really thinking this through? I was representing an independent mortgage broker from a small town on the East Coast. One day, he just up and left without notifying his clients. Fast forward a few months later, and one of his former clients discovers significant mistakes in her residential mortgage paperwork that caused massive issues with the bank, costing thousands in legal fees to rectify. Naturally, she wants to recover damages. Only the broker can't be found. The office is boarded up for non-payment of rent. His house is up for sale, and nobody knows where he went. The only indication of his whereabouts was his Facebook profile. He was swimming with dolphins somewhere sunny with his teenage daughter, which infuriated the plaintiff. Fortunately, he'd paid his insurance up front and it hadn't expired, so he would be defended by us through the insurer. When I finally got in touch with him after around 2 months, he explained that he'd lost all interest in the profession about a year ago. Since then, he took on clients or helped existing ones, but with basically zero financial background checks and basically no regard for structure or timing of the transaction. He was rubber stamping everyone and everything. His work was so shoddy and his file management so poor that we basically had nothing to go on. He was dead to rights, and he didn't care at all. Then one day, he declared bankruptcy, signed the house over to a trustee, and got a short-term visa to live in Australia where his daughter was studying. We settled that one quickly as he had no intentions of returning for trial and we'd probably never be paid. I mean, hey, at least it's over quickly, I guess. We had a client skip bail and run. I looked him up on Facebook and he had posted a photo of the bond paperwork and a bunch of $20 bills. The post read something like, "Man, F the law and my bondsman. Can't nobody tell me nothing. Blah blah, typical hood stuff. We live in BFE, Texas. Dude is not a gangster. Anyways, he didn't realize that the only reason we bonded him was because we were going to represent him. We withdrew the bond and the case. In the motion to withdraw, we quoted his Facebook post and attached a copy of it as Exhibit A when we filed it. I have a relative who's a lawyer. She worked for a hospital on a wrongful life case that was pretty miserable. The plaintiff had given birth to a baby with very severe congenital deformities. The plaintiff sued every health professional she saw while pregnant, claiming that if they had told her about the deformities, she would have aborted. A quick look at medical records shows that the plaintiff never really pursued prenatal care. She went to a local emergency room very early in her pregnancy to get a pregnancy test, apparently common in impoverished communities. And she later returned to that same ED a month later with abdominal pain. The ED doc did an ultrasound on her belly and determined the fetus was not in distress. But he didn't do a thorough exam because he wanted to figure out where the belly pain was coming from, not do an organ scan like an OB would. But she sued that hospital. Then she was arrested for check fraud and saw a physician in jail. But she didn't tell that doc about her pregnancy, so he didn't do an ultrasound at all. But she sued whoever provides that healthcare. The jail, maybe? It's just a sad case that the hospital won handily. This one's a little more messed up, but it's come up a couple times now. If you haven't done your own due diligence and had the problem trying to be taken care of properly through the correct channels, it's really hard to take anything to court. It's hard to place that blame on someone else when you didn't put in any of the work to prevent it in the first place. I represent condo and homeowners associations. One of my condo association clients wanted to evict some tenants because they were fat. I'm not even joking. Now, the law does, in some cases, allow the association to evict non-owner tenants. This is very fact-specific, however. I spent a long time trying to elicit from my client exactly what these tenants were doing that warranted eviction.
Well, they're just disgusting people. They're fat.
You can't evict someone just because they're fat. We didn't end up filing suit. My dad was a patent and trademark attorney about 10 years ago and worked for a pharmaceutical company. The owner of the company adopted the slogan, "Just do it," not knowing that the trademark belonged to Nike. When the owner found out that the trademark belonged to one of the biggest companies in the world, rather than change the slogan and avoid a lawsuit, he calls up Nike and expresses how funny he thinks it is that they have the same slogan. My dad got them to settle the case, and the catchphrase was later changed. The guy literally just called up Nike to say, "Hey, sue me." Luckily, I was on the other side of one of these ridiculous cases. I live in an area where liquor licenses are extremely valuable commodities. They can be transferred from one person to another, which is often easier than convincing a municipality to issue you a new one for your bar or restaurant. My client was opening up a new restaurant and found some wackadoo who had a liquor license that he wasn't using. I believe his bar previously folded. He agreed to sell his license to my client for about $250,000. The contract had a minor notice provision, something like you have to send notice of whatever in 7 days. My client's former lawyer dropped the ball and sent it in 10 days. Now the wackadoo received full payment but decided that because this minor notice provision was breached, he was entitled to keep both the license and the money. There's a doctrine of law called material breach of contract, which in a nutshell means you can only sue for breach of contract if the breach materially impacts your contract rights. For example, if my client had failed to pay for the license, that would be a material breach of contract. But getting a notice document 3 days late when full payment had already been made? Yes, it is a technical breach of contract. But no court in the United States of America would deem that to be a material breach. And certainly no court would let the wackadoo keep the license and the money. So we sued the wackadoo who represented himself. He fought okay for a pro se, but the judge of course ruled against him because his position was crazy. The wackadoo kept the money and my client got the license. In law school doing legal aid, my client was charged with uttering threats. He said something like, "I'm gonna put you 6 feet underground," to his ex-girlfriend, while brandishing a large knife. His defense was that yes, he said it, but he wasn't uttering threats. He just wanted to scare her into legitimately thinking he was going to kill her, because at the time he was angry and he wanted her dead. He thought this was a full defense. Dude, what are you doing? We were defending a hostile workplace claim. I'm speaking with the manager who allegedly threatened violence against the plaintiff. I tell him one of the allegations is that he threatened to kill the plaintiff during his annual review. The manager says, "No way. All I did was..." He opens his desk drawer and places a pistol on the desk in front of me. "Was put this gun on the table. It wasn't even pointed at him." A woman was getting sued following a car accident. I asked her what happened. She said, "Well, I meant to hit the brake, but accidentally hit the gas and rear-ended them." Well, crap, I'm not winning that one. As a former public defender, I'd say roughly 50% of the cases assigned to me were completely undefendable, typically because of some combination of video evidence, police wear body cams where I was practicing, multiple credible eyewitnesses, my client's name and driver's license on a pawn ticket for stolen goods, or my client just straight up admitted to the police that they did it. I don't want to get into specifics because of attorney-client privilege, but I had a few clients who, at our initial meeting, would say they were innocent. It's all a big misunderstanding, and so on. Then I'd show them a video of the police busting in their trailer. Client is on top of his significant other beating the crap out of her with 2 children under 5 present, and then proceeds to fight with the police and ends up getting tased and peeing himself. We could have won that one if only being on lethal amounts of bath salts was a defense. My firm had a guy call in about their son getting hurt at school and them wanting to sue. The kid dislocated his shoulder and brings a doctor's note to sit out. The kid decides screw it and plays anyway. Dislocates shoulder again and now needs surgery. Dad wants to sue the school. This kid is 17 years old. Yeah, I hate to say it, but your kid needs to be making his own decisions at that point. At the age of 17, he should have a little bit more interest in his own well-being. This guy had this whole story about how the cops came into his house illegally without a warrant or consent. The story sounded really good, and I was excited to get the ball rolling. And he finished the 30-minute story up by telling me that he opened the door while cops and rival gangsters were outside, and fired a couple rounds before closing the door back up behind him. He thought that as long as he went home afterwards, he could do whatever he wanted and the police couldn't arrest him without a warrant. If you open your door and straight up start shooting at police officers, yeah, they're gonna come get you. They don't need a warrant. What fan theories have blown your mind with their devastating logic? I like the one about the Rugrats. Ever wondered how Angelica could talk to the babies? Angelica is the only one who can talk to the babies because they're a figment of her imagination. She's spoiled, sad, and lonely because her mother is constantly working and has no time for her. Her relationship with her dad is superficial and unsubstantial. No real love is ever shown to her. So how did it come about that Angelica would have to imagine these babies? Tommy died soon after childbirth, a fact reflected by Stu never leaving the basement, inventing toys that his son will never play with. Chucky died in the car crash along with his mom, also reflected in the actions of his father. The crash has made him a pathetic nervous wreck most of the time. Most interesting is Phil and Lil. There never were any twins. There was just one baby. However, this baby was a stillborn, and Angelica never knew the sex of the stillborn, so she invented twins of different genders. Sadly, Angelica never uses her imaginary friends to comfort or entertain her. Instead, she's mean and nasty to them. She's invented this relationship with these babies so that she can vent her frustrations on being a spoiled, lonely brat who has seen much hardship from these unfortunate parents. Frustrations that can't be satisfied by a typical childhood relationship with a doll, albeit a Cynthia one. You've definitely made me want to take a second look at that show now. I read a theory about Courage the Cowardly Dog that said Courage is actually a normal dog and he sees the world through a dog's eyes. All the villains in the show are just normal people, but to a little dog, they seem scary. They don't actually live in the middle of nowhere, but since his owners are too old to take him out for walks, he only knows what's around his immediate property, and everything beyond that is nothing because he's never seen it. The story of Aladdin is made up by the salesman at the beginning to persuade you to buy the lamp. This one isn't really a theory as much as it is kind of the way the movie goes. You just choose whether or not you want to believe the actual story. Doctor Who. The Doctor's name is a word of power, something that was introduced to the series in Moffat's Series 3 episode The Shakespeare Code. What does the Doctor's name do? It unlocks the Time War. This is the reason he trusts no one but himself to know his own name. During the ending of Forest of the Dead, the 10th Doctor also states to River that there could be only one way she could have known his name. This is also the reason why the Silents are terrified of the Doctor's name. And why not? It would release the Daleks and the Time Lord from the locked Time War. Willy Wonka knew those children would die in his factory. After Augustus gets sucked up the chute, they all hop on board the boat through the Tunnel of Doom. The boat doesn't have 2 extra vacant seats though. It was designed with prior knowledge that they would lose 2 participants before that point. Later, they drive a cream-spewing car with only 4 seats. Did they have another car waiting in the garage in case the others made it? Of course not. Willy Wonka uses children to make candy. You kinda took a dark turn at the end of that one there, but there's a lot of fan theories around this movie, and a lot of them do tend to be dark. I like the idea that at the end of The Thing in 1982, when Kurt Russell offers Keith David the bottle and he drinks out of it, that the bottle is actually filled with gasoline from one of the Molotovs he was throwing earlier. Since the creature wouldn't understand what gasoline tastes like, it wouldn't spit it out. The original Scooby-Doo series is set after a horrible economic depression. Everything is abandoned and falling apart, and all of the villains are people who would normally be really respected. Professors, museum curators, celebrities, who have fallen into hard times just like everyone else. How many times have the gang helped someone not go out of business? This one is my personal theory. That 70s show is a vague sequel to Happy Days. At the end of Happy Days, Richie and Ralph go off to the Korean War, or at least they're training for it. Fonzie stays behind. At this point, you must remember that the Fonz was always the person who kept Richie cool. Flash forward 20 years. Richie, now Red, has become bitter after the war, and without the catalyst that was Arthur Fonzarelli, his friendship with fool neighbor Bob, or Ralph, has fallen apart. Happy Days was made in the 70s and set in the 50s. That 70s show was in the 90s and set in the 70s. I do agree that 70s show was definitely trying to capture the same lightning in a bottle that Happy Days had, just for a newer generation. You're definitely onto a connection there in terms of audience appeal and general timeline, but I don't think that the characters carry over in any way. The existence of SpongeBob and his strange friends is the result of radiation from nuclear arms testing that was performed at the Bikini Atoll in the late 40s and early 50s. Since they live under the atoll, the town is known as Bikini Bottom. In the beginning of 2001: A Space Odyssey, a black screen is displayed while music plays for a few minutes before the film starts. It's believed that this is the monolith tilted 90 degrees and taking up the entire screen, as if the entire film is a technological and evolutionary advancement that Kubrick is bestowing us. Sean Connery's character in The Rock is actually James Bond. He got caught spying on America and was hidden away in various prisons.
This man does not exist in the United States or Great Britain,
says FBI Director Womack. This ties in with the theories of James Bond being a code name for different agents. One that hasn't been brought up yet is Blade Runner. Ridley Scott finally closed the debate a few years ago as to whether or not Deckard was actually a replicant, and he totally was. But to take this one step further, he was a replicant implanted with the memories of Gaff, Edward James Olmos' character. Gaff was actually the top Blade Runner, but was sidelined due to some injury or illness, hence the cane. So Deckard was created and implanted with Gaff's memories to continue the search for Roy Batty and his friends. This explains why Gaff never really does anything aside from drive Deckard around, and why he treats him with such contempt. Gaff's origami also hint at Deckard's true nature, as they seem to demonstrate an insight into what Deckard is feeling. A chicken when he's feeling scared, a stickman with a boner when he's about to meet the smoking hot Rachel, and the unicorn from Deckard's recurring dream. It also helps explain the compliment Gaff pays Deckard at the end of the film. After he apparently hovered above the building and watched Batty nearly kill Deckard without intervening, he lands and says, "You've done a man's job," which is the highest praise you could give a replicant. When it's all laid out like that, I hardly even think it should be considered a theory. It's just clearly what was going on if you take a few minutes to think about it. Okay, let's be honest, Blade Runner is kind of a mess. There's way too many different cuts, and as a result, we have all kinds of fan theories coming up around this one. Always that Deckard's a replicant, which apparently was confirmed that I didn't know. Personally, my favorite book of all time is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is the book that this movie is based off of. If you have a remote interest in Blade Runner, take all this conspiracy stuff, put it off to the side, and read the book objectively, without taking all of this movie stuff into account. Deckard is a completely different character with completely different motivations in the book. The Jetsons and the Flintstones are two portions of the same society. The people living in Bedrock are actually members of a far future society, one may say post-human, that have rejected the day-to-day electronic assistants to live like their long-dead ancestors did, or at least what they think they lived like. This explains the talking animals. They're just synthetic creations. It's been so long since any actual animal lived that didn't have human communication bred and written into it that the ferals don't realize how silly it is to be talking with creatures that didn't even exist alongside early humans. How Garfield is actually dying of starvation, and just imagine John and Odie. There was a reference to this in a Halloween-themed comic. Garfield woke up in a condemned and abandoned house. He calls out for Odie and John, but there's no answer. He then wills the illusion back on himself, and continues his delusions about his family. To all you Potterheads out there, when Sybil Trelawney predicted Harry was born in midwinter, she was laughed at, as Harry's birthday was in July. However, it is a known fact that, spoiler alert, Voldemort's soul is inside Harry. It's possible that Professor Trelawney was detecting the part of Voldemort inside Harry as Voldemort was born mid-December. Pinky and the Brain. One is a genius, the other's insane. Brain constantly plans to take over the world, suggesting he's insane. Pinky often finds ways to ruin these plans. So, who is the genius? You just gave me a whole new appreciation for Pinky. I remember there was a pretty good one about how R2-D2 was Luke's father, and this of course was before Empire Strikes Back came out. Luke's father was mortally wounded by Vader. His brain was removed from his body and placed in life support inside a robot. This is why C-3PO is so worried about R2's operational status. C-3 knows that R2 has biological components. Turns out, Luke, who got very little Jedi training, isn't all that great. It's his Jedi father inside of R2 every time. Think about it. Early on, when Luke does something with the Force, R2 is always there, except for the one time on Hoth. And what is R2 doing at that time? Deploying a long-range Force antenna we never see again. This one is obviously completely invalidated by, 30 years of the franchise now, but I thought it was fun. Archer TV show. Whenever someone eats at the Chinese restaurant and brings home a tinfoil swan full of leftovers, they're going to betray the company. Episode 1, when Archer wants to break into the mainframe and erase and alter his financial records. Episode 9, Lana is going to join Odin. And there's an episode where Cyril takes a bribe at the restaurant and his bribe money is in the swan. I'm pretty sure this theory is out there somewhere else, but I've yet to find it. In the beginning of Finding Nemo, the father imagines one son survived, when in reality his whole family was destroyed. The movie is an allegory of the father's journey through the stages of grief. Denial. He won't let his son go to school because it's not safe. Anger. He scolds his son for venturing out of his control. Bargaining. He puts up with an amnesiac travel buddy to help him find his son. Despair. He sees his son flush down the drain. Acceptance. He learns to let go and let things be the way they are. Almost everyone in the story tells the father he has to let go of his son. His travels take him to the land down under, aka the underworld. The movie ends with him saying goodbye as his son visually disappears into the void. And the kicker? Nemo means nobody in Latin. Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Will was murdered on the basketball court in West Philly. The taxi driver is God. That's why we felt the cab was different or rare. God takes him to heaven where he lives in a mansion with his wealthy aunt and uncle and slowly works out his issues and hardships. At the end of Kevin Smith's Dogma, Bethany Sloan, the last scion, i.e. God's chosen to continue his good works on earth as a last resort should there need to be one, is saying goodbye to the 13th apostle, a gentleman named Rufus. During this final exchange, before he returns to heaven, Rufus suggests that Bethany name her son after him. She scoffs, but the idea is implanted. Now let's assume that Bethany Sloan, the last scion, names her son, the new last scion in the bloodline, Rufus, after taking his suggestion to heart. Does anyone know anyone from the future that is charged with saving humanity as we know it that is named Rufus? How about Rufus from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure? That's right, Rufus from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is the last scion, sent back in time by God to save Earth by teaming up with an unlikely band of teenage heroes and historical figures. This is why I consider Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure a part of the View Askew universe. George Carlin also happens to be in both movies, but I'm not sure if I can come up with a link between those two. And in case someone mentions that Rufus was sent back in time from the year 26XX or something, keep in mind it could still be him. Time travel, you know? Or he could just be a part of Rufus as the last scion bloodline that goes all the way into the extreme future. Back to the future. The Doc is ready to kill himself along with Marty in that parking lot during the first time travel scene. Not only has he never tested the time machine, but he claims that many of his inventions have been failures. So during the moment when he's about to find out if his life's work was a huge success or a complete waste, he not only drives the DeLorean towards himself, but also grabs onto Marty when he tries to run away. If that first time travel test was a failure, they both would have been killed, which is exactly what Doc wanted had the experiment been a failure. You know, when you lay it out like that, it does make sense, but I always prefer to think of Doc as more crazy than sad. In My Neighbor Totoro, Totoro is the god of death. Here are my points. 1. It's saying that Totoro is in fact a messenger of death, and whoever sees him will soon die. The hospital that the sister's mother was in was based on a real hospital for terminally ill patients. Number 2, later in the story, the villagers find a slipper in a pond, which is in fact May's. At this point, she's already drowned in the pond. Satsuki lied that the slipper wasn't May's out of denial. From this scene forward, the sisters appear to have no shadow. Number 3, Satsuki pleaded to Totoro and the cat bus to take her to where May is. While on the cat bus, she says, "Nobody can see us." This scene is Satsuki leading herself to the land of the dead by taking the cat bus. Number 4, at the hospital, the mother says, "I think I feel May and Satsuki smiling there in that tree." Why don't the sisters go and see their mom if they're already there? Why do they just leave the corn there instead? It's said that the sisters were dead at that point, and the Japanese pronunciation of corn is similar to kill child. Number 5, the final scenes seem to be a happy epilogue, but they in fact happened before the major events of the movie. And finally, the movie was set in a place in Japan where there was a case of a murdering of 2 sisters which happened in the 1960s. This event took place on May 1st, while the sisters' names are Satsuki, May in Japanese, and May in English. In the real-life case, the younger sister was missing first, and the older sister was seen to be looking for her frantically. The next day, the younger sister's body was found in the forest. The older sister was in such a state of shock and kept rambling ambiguous words about seeing a cat monster or a great big raccoon monster to the police. The sisters were in fact from a single-parent family as well. The mother died of illness. An alternate theory I hear a lot is that there are no children. They can't have kids because of the wife's illness, and the father in his loneliness is writing in his diary about the kids he wished he had. He's often seen writing throughout the movie. In Inception, Leonardo DiCaprio's character is in the real world in the ending scene. He talks about how totems only work for specific people. The top was his wife's totem. It wouldn't work for him. His totem is his wedding ring. In the dream world, his wife is alive, and he's still married to her. Therefore, he wears his wedding ring. In all the scenes in the real world, his wife is dead, and he's no longer married. Because of this, he doesn't wear his ring. In the last scene, he isn't wearing his ring. Time to rewatch Inception and pay far too close attention to Leo's left hand. There's a theory in Ferris Bueller's Day Off that Cameron invented Ferris and he's living out what Cameron wishes he could be. Makes the movie mind-blowing. In Kill Bill, the bride doesn't kill Bill. First, you have to put her rampage in chronological order. She wakes up in the hospital, kills Buck, flies to Japan, kills everyone in the tea house, then comes back to the States to kill Vernita Green. We know this because O-Ren's name is already crossed off the list when she parks outside Vernita's house. In the process of killing Green, she accidentally does so in front of her young daughter. Her immediate reaction is shame. She tries to hide the knife behind her leg. From that point on, she doesn't kill anyone else. Bud dies from a snake bite. Daryl Hannah's character has her eye plucked out but is still alive. Then we get to Bill. They tell the story of the 5-point palm fist of death technique, but in the training sequences, it's never shown that she learns it. We're specifically told that Pai Mei never taught it to anyone. The other part that's suspicious is the play acting. When Beatrix first runs into the house, there's a play scene with her daughter. They pretend to shoot her and she pretends to be dead. This is what Bill does. At the end of the film, Beatrix is curled up on a bathroom floor crying, "Thank you, thank you." Who is she thanking? Bill, for letting her go. It was the only way for either of them to exit the situation gracefully. During the end credits, each of the people on the list who died gets a line through their name. Daryl Hannah is marked with a question mark because she was left alive. But Bill's name isn't marked at all, because they never killed Bill in Kill Bill. In The Matrix, people aren't used as an energy source. That's physically impossible, as it would take more energy to keep people alive than you'd get out of them. It's just the misinformation humans have. The machines were built to care for humans, and they're still going about that task. The machines think they're giving humans a better and more peaceful life. When people escape and try to free themselves, they're actually being let into another level of the Matrix. The machines realize some people need to strive and think that they're important, so they construct a false reality in which they can do so. The Sopranos. The guy in the members-only jacket walked out of the bathroom and killed Tony in front of Carmela and Anthony. It's the reason why the screen cuts to black. In a previous episode, Bobby asks him what he thinks death is like, and Tony says, "I bet it just cuts to black." The symbolism was pretty much hitting you over the head. How the family was posed like the Last Supper, how Tony was eating an orange earlier, how the episode where Tony was shot earlier was titled Members Only, how we kept hearing bells all through the episode. He definitely got whacked, and like he said, he never heard it coming. In the first Alien film, I always thought that the Weyland-Yutani Corporation already knew about the aliens and were looking for them. Not really so much mind-blowing, but I think it makes the film more sinister and creepy. I really love the theory that in Inspector Gadget, the inspector we know is actually the second inspector, built as a completely robotic replacement after the first was lost in action. He was loaded with his old memories, and nobody would have been the wiser, except that the original Inspector Gadget didn't actually die. Upon returning from whatever disaster caused his bosses to give up on him as KIA, and now horribly disfigured, he discovers his replacement is living his life, even with his dog and raising his niece. The original inspector snaps and vows to devote the rest of his life to the destruction of the ungodly replacement. He disavows everything he once knew and loved, even going so far as to take a new name, Dr. Claw. After watching and reading Fight Club about 100 times, I'm fully aware that Marla Singer is also a figment of the main character's imagination. She's the living embodiment of everything he originally hates about himself, and by the end of the movie, he's able to live with it, as well as absorb what he needed out of Tyler. If you watch it in this context, you'll see clear hints to this. The meetings stop working when the things he's running from follow him there, being Marla. He's screwing her as Tyler, the idealized version of himself, but as a half-disgust, half-envy thing going on as Jack. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description as well. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.